Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. I am your host, John DeLynn. It is August 16th, 2022, and we are here in part 3 of another epic family Mormon story with Evan Smith and Weston Smith. Hey, guys.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good.
You wiped out yet? Are you ready? Your gas tanks are filled for part 3?
Why not both?
Yeah. Both. No. Full gas tanks, ready to go.
We're here with Gerardo Samano. Hey, Gerardo.
Hey, John. Hey, everybody.
Yeah. And so just to recap, if you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, you want to pause and stop now, go back and watch parts 1 and 2. But basically, part 1 was all about Evan Smith being raised in Murray, Utah, to Orthodox faithful Mormon parents, and him doing all the Mormon things, culminating in him getting married in the temple, going on a mission, going to law school, and settling in the Boston area, and ascending his way up through the Mormon patriarchy into the position of a branch president and eventually a Mormon bishop, and raising his Mormon family with his dear wife, and also pursuing a position in corporate American law, focusing on startups and new business companies and ventures. And when we left part 1, he was a Mormon bishop. A member of his branch / ward had come out to him as gay, and then eventually his son came out to him as gay and eventually decided to go serve a mission. So that was part 1. We paused Evan's story. We jumped to part 2, where son Weston told us about growing up gay in the Mormon church with your dad being bishop, what that was like, how he reached a point of sort of heavy suicidal ideation prior to serving a mission. He comes out to his parents, his aunt, his brother, his community, and decides inexplicably, while his dad's serving as a bishop, decides to go ahead and serve a Mormon mission as an out gay Mormon. And he does, and he gets called to Brazil, and he goes to serve in Brazil. He serves in the office, becomes his own leader, serves almost a full mission. But once he reached a second point of suicidality, this time on his mission, he has what could be described as a spiritual experience or as a psychological experience, but a very affirming, life-saving experience where Weston receives a very clear impression that he needs to go home early on his mission, which he does. His mom had been begging him to do that anyway, and his dad is supportive. And he goes home early from his mission, but way healthier and way happier and way resolved to leave the Mormon church and live a happy, healthy life. And by the time you come home, what is your calling in the church, Evan?
First counselor in the Stake Presidency.
Okay. So while Weston's on his mission, Evan gets called into a Stake Presidency, which actually is higher than a bishop within Mormonism, because a grouping of 8 or 9 or 10 Mormon congregations is known as a stake. And so to be in the Stake Presidency means you're one of 3 main leaders over 8 to 10 Mormon congregations. It's often compared to a Catholic parish. Is that right?
Parish would be like a ward, and diocese would be like a stake.
To a Catholic diocese.
Right. Which
is kind of big news and kind of cool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back in Evan's story, and we're going to have you catch us up on what it's like to go from Mormon bishop, to Mormon Stake Presidency member, and getting called into that. And then we're going to retrace your experiences, both of your son being on his mission but coming home. But really what we're going to be focusing on for part 3 is once this LGBT issue, once Evan leaves the church, once Weston leaves the church, once your wife, as the story will progress, starts to question her own membership in the church, you're now serving at some of the highest levels of the church. And we're going to be focusing today for this part 3 on your interactions with at least 2 general authorities, which basically represents, the top 90 leaders within the entire $1 trillion at this point Mormon corporation. You're going to be interacting with some of the top 90 leaders in the church, trying to get answers to your issues and your questions, but also try and push them towards change. And so that's what part 3 is going to be about. How does that sound?
That's a pretty good summary.
Are you ready for it?
I hope so.
Gerardo, anything you want to add?
No, I think that was a great intro.
Let's jump in.
Yeah.
All right. So Evan, where do you want to take us now?
So I guess we'll start when I was called into the stake presidency. So I had actually, when Wes went on his mission, I'd been released as bishop. I was released as bishop in 2016, and Wes went on his mission in 2017. So I'd had almost a year off from being a church leader. I had been an early morning seminary teacher for a few weeks at the point when I got called into the stake presidency, and that was about a month after you left on your mission. I think I got called into the stake presidency.
Yeah, sounds about right.
So the way that getting called into a stake presidency works, the process is interesting. They have all of the high counselors in the stake, so that's about 12 men from the area stake presidency, and all of the currently serving bishops and branch presidents all come, and whoever else the stake president wants to, whatever other men in the stake president feels are possible candidates to be stake president. They come to the church building early in the morning to meet with a general authority. And the general authority is usually accompanied by an area authority companion. Area authority is one level down from a general authority in the church hierarchy. And I was asked to come and interview because I had been a former bishop. So the stake president at the time felt like I would be a good candidate to come and be interviewed as potentially being the new stake president, because our stake was going through a reorganization. They were actually forming a new stake, and so a whole new stake presidency was being called. So I got asked to come and interview, and morning interview went well. Didn't think I'd get called back. Wasn't hoping to get called back in the afternoon as a finalist, I guess you could say, for the stake presidency position. But I did get a phone call. And I remember I was in my room when the call came, and Cheryl and I both kind of looked at each other with kind of deer in the headlights looks, like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Because we know that once you get the call back, you're at least going to be a counselor in the stake presidency, if not the stake president. And we had just been through a lot of hard times serving as branch president and then bishop, and then trying to have everything just work from a perspective of believing, but trying to do what was healthy and right for our kids and for Wes, and being progressive and trying to bring about change in the church. As I was serving as bishop, trying to focus on love so much and all those things. And it kind of had felt nice for almost a year to not have any of that pressure and to just kind of focus on each other more. But when the phone call came for me to go back to the stake center for the second interview in the afternoon, I looked at Cheryl and I said, this is a good opportunity for us to continue to try to bring about change in the church. Because unfortunately, I think I said this before, the way it works in Mormonism, members listen to people in leadership positions more than they do other people. And so I thought, if I can be in a leadership position and try to emphasize love and just more inclusion and acceptance generally, then that would be a good thing. So Cheryl was supportive. I was, she was, nervous and reluctantly supportive, but she was still supportive. I went to the stake center half hour away and got interviewed by Elder Anthony D. Perkins, who's a general authority. He'd been a general authority for quite some time. He interviewed me first, and then he interviewed Cheryl. During the interview, it was the typical kind of worthiness interview. He wants to make sure that you're worthy to serve. Asked if I looked abhorrent, if I was the same in public as I am in private. Asked Cheryl the same things, what she thought, if she thought I was worthy. Asked if we fought. We said, sometimes we do. We're passionate. We love each other. So sometimes we have disagreements, and then we, work things out. he actually, in that interview, it was interesting. He spent a lot of time talking to us after he assessed that I was worthy and he extended the calling.
Yeah. What was the first interview about? Because
In the morning?
Yeah, was it with him too?
Yeah, it was with him and the area authority together. And
how was it different?
So that interview is both of them together, just with me alone, not with Cheryl.
Right.
And they just are kind of like asking questions to test if what the person being interviewed, what their ideas are for the stake. What they think the stake needs to be has an emphasis on.
That's interesting.
They also ask you in that interview. They ask everybody in that interview, all of the high council members and the bishops and whatever other kind of former bishop like me who might be invited to come too. They ask every man for 3 names of who they thought would be a good stake president. So that's kind of the first one. I don't know if it's the names that narrows it down for round 2 or the naming process, but I think or the answers that people give or whatever. But yeah,
Isn't that interesting? Because you're being interviewed for the position, and then they ask you who's the best one. I always wonder if someone says, "Well, me," probably not, right?
Oh yeah, I think if you put yourself down, if you write your name, if you give yourself, I think that's a surefire way to not get the position.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is an interesting process for sure. And I can understand. I mean, you have someone, a general authority coming from Salt Lake who doesn't know anybody in the area, really.
Yeah.
Trying to make a decision of who to call as the leader of the stake. They kind of need to rely a lot on those names that are given to them and the advice that they're hearing from the local people on the ground. So they like to talk about it as a pure revelation thing, but I think there's a lot of reliance on the others. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. Some people know that when I worked at church headquarters for a year, around 1997, I was in charge of helping program a general authority candidate tracking system. And they had former stake presidents, former mission presidents, former temple presidents in there. And they track all this stuff like mental health of spouse, financial situation, children, any potential problems within the family, who like all that stuff is tracked very meticulously in a database.
Yeah, it still is as of 2017 when I was called, because I remember we had to fill out a separate sheet when I actually got called after the interview and setting apart and everything. We filled out an information sheet. A lot of that stuff on there.
It gets put in a database.
Yeah, it's very. I was surprised. There's a lot of information they were asking about me and the family and their kids and stuff like that. So
I can. By this time, you're a nuanced but still believing Mormon. Is that right?
That definitely nuanced in the sense that I thought the church was wrong on gay marriage. Thought the church was wrong on women not having the priesthood. I thought that the blacks in the priesthood ban, the ban on the racial priesthood ban, was a complete racist mistake. But still believed that the Book of Mormon was the Word of God, and that there was some literal historicity to the Book of Mormon and historicity to the Bible. So I was very kind of nuanced and progressive. Didn't think the Book of Mormon had to be 100% correct. I thought Joseph could have brought it about with some mistakes in it, but that it was still, scripture and true. So
yeah,
that was where I was.
Cool.
Did you feel like you had to nuance your answers to his questions to be viewed as acceptable as a candidate? In other words, you're different than probably what they were looking for. Maybe not. And that if you give fully honest, open, candid answers, maybe you might be disqualified, but you want the job because you want to make a positive influence, or was it just straightforward for you still?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say I want the job. If I got the job, I think I was excited about the positive influence, but I don't feel like I had to change any of the answers with Elder Perkins. He came across as, I don't know if I'd say progressive, but very kind of just open-minded, and he asked questions in the interview that were focused on what they should be, right? He didn't ask any of my positions on those controversial topics. He just said, how do you feel about the Savior, and how do you feel about, what the stake needs to do? And he was very appropriate in his interviewing. He talked a lot to us, interestingly, about change in the church and how it comes about, that it gets debated for decades amongst the general authorities, and that the prophet is the one who decides when the time is right to actually make it happen. And it was interesting because I asked the other members of the stake presidency afterwards if he talked about change in the church with them. And they said, no, he didn't talk about that at all. And then Cheryl expressed concern about us serving in the calling because she didn't want us to be judged as a family. Because, Wes had just barely told our former stake president a month before when he left on his mission that he was gay. And so she didn't know where that was going to go, if Wes was going to come home early or what was going to happen. And so we didn't say anything about Wes being gay in the interview, but she was concerned that we would have kind of a spotlight on our family and that we'd be judged. And Elder Perkins just said, you don't need to worry about that. One of the reasons you're being called is because of your family, because of the kids you've raised and what you've done as a mom. That's one of the reasons why Evan's being called. So he was cool. I actually really liked Elder Perkins. He was a good guy.
That's got to feel validating. Like bishop is kind of validating. Stake presidency's got to feel really validating.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it does. I'll be honest. It does. It feels like you are doing things correctly. So yeah. Yeah, I actually felt, now you say that, John, I actually felt like it was validating, not of being more, not of like, in the sense that my progressive Mormonism was okay. Mm-hmm. That's what was, that was mostly what I was feeling.
Not so much for like the promotion, right?
Not like, oh, I got a promotion, I'm a good soldier, but I was like, hey, God's okay with me believing this, because look at this, I'm getting this calling. Like, it's okay to be approaching the gospel the way that I was. So, yeah, that was validating.
All right. Well, so what was your time in the stake presidency like?
It was good, actually. I had a great stake president. He was a really good guy. Oh, I should also mention too, one of the things Elder Perkins said in our training to us as a stake presidency was that we could talk to our wives about everything and get their counsel on everything going on in the stake, including callings and stuff that people say to us and stuff like that. So that was really interesting to me. That's not something you normally hear. You think that bishops and stake presidents and stuff are supposed to keep everything totally to themselves, and that they're not sharing things with their wives and things like that. But he was like, look, this is a family thing, and you should be getting the input of the women in your lives. So that was really good. Elder Perkins, again, he was a good one. So,
do you happen to remember his background?
I think he was in consulting, if I remember right. Okay. He actually asked me in my interview, how are you going to balance being, partner at a big law firm while you're also being in the stake presidency? And I said, well, how did you balance doing consulting while you were doing your church callings and everything else? So, he kind of laughed when I threw that back at him a little bit.
It's probably management consulting.
Something like that.
And, there's kind of this law, like finance, management consulting, hedge funds kind of stuff, like, and then sometimes medical doctors, but like once you're back east or like elite faculty at major universities, once you're back east, these are kind of really high octane. I'm not trying to flatter you, and I'm not asking you to include yourself in this description, but it's kind of like super high octane individuals, especially in the Boston area, DC area, New York area. It's kind of starting to be higher stakes a little bit.
Yeah, and I think he was asking from that perspective. I'm not going to but he was actually in Asia for a lot of his career. So it was interesting to have him ask me that when he seemed to have a more involved career than what I was. But the stake presidency position was good. We had a real focus on the youth as a stake. The stake president was really able to connect with the youth in a way that was pretty amazing. We had a stake youth fireside where our wives, we all sat there and just took kind of anonymous questions from the youth. During that fireside, one of the questions was about gay members of the church and how they can find a place in the church when they're asked to not ever have a spouse, and to just how can they fully serve in the church when there's all these callings that they can't have because they can't be bishops if they're not married, things like that. It was an interesting question. And it was interesting to hear the different answers that we gave as a stake presidency. I had actually reviewed that question, and even though it was anonymous, we got the questions in advance. I had reviewed it and kind of prepared an answer, and the stake president was cool, and he said, hey, you answer it. Because he knew I had told him that Wes was gay. I said, hey, I have I didn't know the stake president before he called me, and I just wanted him to be aware of the possibility that Wes might come home early. So I told him about Wes, and he was very supportive and just said, Evan, you take this question. So I answered it for all the Stake youth and their parents there, and just said, I don't know, but I know we need to be more loving of LGBTQ people. I explained how the church now teaches that it's not a choice to be gay. That was a change from before. And I taught that, whatever path members of the church choose who are LGBTQ, we need to honor them and support them and love them. So it was a great opportunity to feel like I was doing some good. When Wes came home from his mission, actually, so this was 2 years later, I served in the Stake Presidency from 2017 to 2019. Wes came home in May of 2019. And a week after he came home, there was a stake conference. And I gave a talk in the general session of that stake conference on Sunday morning about loving and not judging people who are having doubts about the church, and about how people who leave the church, we shouldn't look badly on them, and about how we need to just be more kind and loving in general. And I specifically talked about LGBTQ members of the church, and about how people are leaving the church a lot because of LGBTQ issues, and how we just need to be more loving and supportive than we are. I had a lot of members of the stake come up after that talk and talk to me about how much they appreciated that. So in other meetings throughout those 2 years, I had the chance behind closed doors to correct things that sometimes people would say. Sometimes people would say homophobic remarks, and I'd be like, I don't know about that. I'd correct some things. I remember Ed Smart came out while I was serving. Somebody said something at girls' camp.
This is Elizabeth Smart's dad.
Yeah, Elizabeth Smart's dad came out as gay. And someone said something when I was at a girls' camp, and I kind of said, well, he was doing what he thought was right. Like, you can't judge him for getting a divorce. He's been gay for decades now in this marriage. And can you just imagine what it would have been like if being in a gay marriage was acceptable socially at that time? Like, maybe he wouldn't be getting a divorce now. Maybe he would have found somebody that he, fell in love with back then. And I think I got people who heard that looking at me like, well, what's President Smith saying? But I had opportunities to do a little bit of this and that here and there in the calling, and it felt good. It felt good to be serving that way, and to focus on the youth like we did was really, really fun. It was cool. I took them out on my boat a lot, did a lot of good social things with the youth, and it was a cool calling.
Yeah, like if you think about how turbulent the 20 teens were with the gospel, with all the internet stuff, with ordained women, with the LGBT stuff, Prop 8, the gospel topics essays, a lot of internet turbulence for the church to start calling progressive and even LGBT affirming men into bishoprics or stake presidencies or even stake high councils was and probably is a really big deal. I have a friend who lost his faith, told his bishop or stake president, and then he got called into a bishopric. And he's like, dude, I don't believe. And he's like, yeah, that's why we want you in the bishopric. There are people like you all throughout the ward, and you're going to be able to help them. There's been a conscious part of the church to incorporate leadership with more progressive leaders at times. I'm not saying church-wide, but it must have just been amazing for your wards and stakes. Think about the LGBT kids that knew you were there, right? Or the parents that, we don't always give the church kudos, but kudos for that.
Yeah, I think in our area especially, it was pretty needed, I would say.
Yeah.
It's I don't know, when you're out east, and also I will say in Canada too, it's not even a question whether or not gay people are accepted legally.
Yeah.
Obviously personally everyone has their own different encounters with it, but to have society be so misaligned with the church out there is really jarring for people who grew up there, like me, who see, pride flags in every teacher's window at school because, it's part of non-discrimination laws and whatnot. And yeah, and so I don't know. I think the church really needed people like my dad.
So you're saying it was almost like an existential threat. If they don't call progressive leadership in these more progressive liberal areas.
Well, I know our seminary class had a couple of revolts against when they switched from one teacher to another because the teacher started teaching stuff about trans kids, and some of the kids are like, "Nope, that's wrong," and you're gonna either take that back or I think some of them just walked out. Like
they did. I was first presidency in the first counselor in the stake presidency over the seminary program in the stake at that time when that happened, and I got a call. And I called the stake president. I said, "Hey, can I go talk to this teacher?" And I went and talked to the teacher, and I said, "Hey, what you're teaching is wrong. You can't do that." So that was good to be able to feel like I was helping in some way. But it also extremely frustrating because it's all just local. You still have messages coming from the general church. So.
This just reminded me that I have some good friends that they got married and they're in a gay relationship. Before they got married, they went and visited one of his parents' ward where he grew up in Boston, where the stake president is Elder Holland's son.
Yeah.
And he was there that Sunday, and he came down.
I'm thinking it's David Holland.
Probably.
Yeah. So
he came down and congratulated them for being engaged.
So Elder Holland's grandson was actually on my mission and was my AP for a while too. So it's the same. Yeah.
Yeah. There's an LGBTQ Sunday school class in his stake. There was, at least
cool.
when I was there.
So.
Yeah. We could talk about this later, but the church is needing to hold down the conservative Orthodox guard and maintain its homophobic stances, but still in these liberal progressive fringe areas have lots of outreach and lots of firesides and lots of progressive bishops and stake presidency members just to keep the wheels on the wagon. What a hard job to straddle all that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was hard. And it was also hard because Wes was on his mission. I was worried about him, right? Worried about him down in Brazil the whole time. I found a study 2017, I mentioned it before, Brian Simmons, about PTSD from gay church members, just from church teachings. And that kind of floored me when I saw that. I also bumped across Bryce Cook's amazing essay. It's Mormon LGBT questions.com. And that's just almost like a less person who wrote the essay right before 1978 that influenced President Kimball to change the policy. I think it was less pure. Anyway, that essay it's an amazing essay. People should go check it out. But those things kind of helped me still, even though I was serving in this calling, feeling like I was doing some good, I kept looking at...
Did you say Bryce Cook?
Bryce Cook, yeah. He's great.
Bryce Cook. And it's called what?
MormonLGBTquestions.com.
He's in Arizona, right?
Yeah, he's in Arizona. He heads up all group down there for
He's awesome.
LGBTQ members. Yeah, he's awesome. But anyway, I kept my nose in the kind of topic of studying all these things that were coming out all the time on the LGBTQ issue.
Oh, it was Lester Bush.
Lester Bush,
who
that's
wrote
right.
that article in 73 in Dialogue.
Right. And Bryce said he was writing that essay in the same spirit, right, of showing how the church could change its doctrine without violating any of its core existing tenets, and it could get there on the race and the priesthood issue. And Bryce was saying, hey, this is the same situation with the LGBTQ issue. We can get there. And I took a lot of inspiration from that essay. About a year into the calling, home teaching was changed to ministering. About year and a half into the calling, 2-hour church happened instead of 3-hour church. We had a or a stake conference in October of 2018, and Elder Paul H. Sinclair presided at that. He was the general authority. It was interesting. It was a good stake conference. I talked, again, kind of a little bit about how change in the church happens. That was one of the comments I made on one of my talks, and how the only thing that's constant in the church is change. I said that over the pulpit. I said, we got God. People say God doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the way he does that is by always giving us what we need at the time we need it in our lives. And that's always going to be different for us personally and also as a global church. Sometimes the circumstances in the world are different. And so God's going to change the way he approaches the church, and that policies will change. Sometimes doctrine will change, things like that. I didn't say it quite as bluntly as that. I tried to walk the fine line a little better, but
Let me ask you about one thing.
Yeah.
So the November 15 policy was instituted by Thomas S. Monson, his administration.
Right.
And I think it was also reversed during Thomas S. Monson's. It was reversed during
Reversed
Nelson's.
during Nelson.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it was Nelson who doubled down and claimed that the
Yeah. it was revelation.
November 15 policy was revelation. And so I guess it was Monson's death and Nelson's ascent to prophet, along with Elder Oaks replacing Uchtdorf as as counselor in the First Presidency.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, that was the impetus to the 2 hour, the reduction of church from 3 hours to 2 hours on Sunday, the ministering program, the reversal of the policy that Nelson himself has said was doctrine. I wonder if that was kind of a exciting or a confusing time to see all these exciting new changes, to know that Oaks was now more powerful, that Nelson was more powerful, but that Monson was gone. I wonder how you processed all that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Especially since Nelson had been kind of a homie a little bit.
I don't know if he was a homie. He did come to yeah, like I said, I grew up in a ward, met him several times growing up, but he did attend my dad's viewing. He came to my dad's viewing when he passed. But I'm in 2018 still here in what I'm telling, but the reversal happened in 2019, shortly before Wes came home from his mission, and I was happy about it. It was interesting. As a stake presidency, we talked about it, and there was a lot of discussion of how policy can change, but doctrine can't. And I was kind of like, doctrine changes too. But I didn't, you can't say things too loudly. So it was exciting to see that reversal happen. Yeah, I was excited that happened. But in just several months before then, this Elder Sinclair in our private post-state conference meeting had told us that it was ironic that he said, I don't think change will happen on LGBTQ issues. And I don't know if he was saying that in response to what I had mentioned in my talk that I had given about how change is always happening. He said that won't change, and I actually cried when he said that. I think he noticed I cried. But then he said he does think that one change that'll happen is that more women will speak in general conference. So I thought that was interesting. But then it was just a few months later that the November 20 that policy got reversed,
which hasn't happened. Women actually have spoken less.
I know. I know.
I'm kind of laughing because I'm like, the bar is so low.
Yeah.
Ooh, more women in general conference. It's like,
well, there was this time after ordained women where they were trying to let women pray in general conference, which was a newer thing, relatively newer. They were trying to let women talk more. They were having them seat up on the stand.
The women's conference, I think, was created during that time. Is that right?
So, I mean, they were trying to ramp up the women thing a little bit.
They were trying. What is it like? Just recently, they had no Saturday night session at all. Then they reinstated it.
Yeah.
And they kept going back and forth, from one conference to the next. And I think they're really having a hard time figuring out how to make it all work.
Yeah.
But I did think it was very interesting that Elder Sinclair said there won't be any change on LGBTQ issues in October 2018. And then in April 2019, they reversed the policy of exclusion. I was like, wow, that's... Yeah,
that's change.
It's definitely changed. That's a big change. So yeah, it was interesting. So...
were you seeing all these changes as damage control? Were you seeing the numbers in the stake decline at all?
Or as modern day revelation, like a new prophet, new revelation?
I wasn't necessarily seeing numbers in our stake affected by this so much. I was just, the way I spun the reversal was that they just got it wrong in the first instance. So this was a correction, right? And I didn't accept that it was revelation before, even though President Nelson, again, you got to remember my position on what doctrine was it had to be canonized to actually really be binding on me. So all the other stuff that I heard and the changes in the policy, I was just like, okay, well, that's what they're thinking now, but whatever, I just carried on without getting it too into my soul. So
yeah.
Let's see. So Wes comes home in May 2019. Then in June 2019, I kind of had a faith, well, not kind of, I had a full-blown faith crisis.
While you're in a stake presidency.
While I'm in a stake presidency. Yeah. My other son, Owen, he's 2 years younger than Wes, had been admitted to BYU, and he was about to be ordained an elder. He really struggled with LGBTQ issues and with women's issues in the church. He was in our YSA branch, and I talked to him a ton about it. And I got him to the point where he was able to give a talk in the YSA branch about how, and YSA is young single adult, by the way, sorry for any never Mormon listeners. He gave a talk on church on Sunday about how waiting for change in the church is like waiting for rain. And if you just stare up at the sky and wait, it seems like it's forever in coming. But if you just go about doing your thing all the time, and serving in the church and doing what God wants you to do, then the rain will come and the change will happen sooner than you think, right? I mean, he was drinking my Kool-Aid, and was ready to go to BYU, but I could see that he was torn up, right? I knew him well enough that I was like, okay, he's doing this for me. He's being ordained an elder, and he's going to BYU despite his doubts because of me. And I was one night had a dream about being this authoritative, mean jerk of a dad, and I woke up really just panicky at like 3 a.m., didn't know what to do. I had this really, really strong prompting, like as strong as I felt it for any other promptings that I'd had in my life in the church, that I needed to study how Joseph Smith could have written the Book of Mormon. Like not translated it from God. Could he have made it up? And up until that point, I had studied a lot of doctrinal issues, and a lot of all the stuff I had studied was, the CES letter was like old news to me. I had read it and digested it. Wes is smiling. He read it before his mission.
I had always been looking for a reason to kind of like get out of the church as a teenager, because I didn't really believe it, but it was playing such a vital social role for me and like making me feel like I was accepted by my parents and by my peers, that when I found the CES letter, I was like, oh, surely this is the smoking gun there's no way that they've seen this before. And I brought it to my dad. He's like, oh, so you finally found this. I was like, what do you mean finally found this? He's like, okay, let's sit. We're going to talk about this for a while and go through why, like all the Fair Mormon stuff. And yeah. Yeah. I had found the apologetic answers to a lot of that stuff, and they weren't perfect answers to me, but I was like, it doesn't have to be perfect as long as there's an answer. It doesn't have to be the best answer, right?
Elder Oaks has a talk to CES teachers, I believe, saying that exact same thing. We don't have to come up with good answers. Yeah. We just have to have an answer.
An answer. I remember that talk. Yeah. Yeah. So
he was talking about you.
I don't know. But I had given as a bishop, I'd given a fireside to the youth on the gospel topic essays. I did that. I said, hey, we got to talk about these things. We got to inoculate these youth. And so I wasn't surprised by any of these issues, but my foundational core of my testimony was the Book of Mormon. I was like, if that's true, and none of this other stuff matters, right? If that's true, the church is true, and all the other stuff is just us being humans trying to figure out and messing things up along the way.
So like every bishop, every stake president, everywhere almost might have that thought of, I wonder if the Book of Mormon is really true. But that's the last time and place you want to be actually diving in and going down that rabbit hole. What do you think allowed you to dive down that Book of Mormon rabbit hole, whereas most bishopric members and stake president members are going to run as far away from that as they possibly could?
Yeah, I felt like I was harming my family. I was really freaked out and worried that I was forcing my family to do things that they didn't want to do. And it made it like what really it was I knew what Wes went through on his mission and the hell he went through and the trauma he experienced. And then I saw Owen struggling, and I was like, well, wait, Owen's straight. Okay. He's a straight white male. Church can work for him, but he was still struggling too. And so I was like, am I doing this to Owen too? Do I want to mess this up again with another son? And what about my daughters? I know they really had a hard time with women's issues in the church. Like, what am I doing to them? If I'm progressively nuancing all my family to stay in the church, which I was doing, are they really best off? Or like, what am I doing to my family was really what made me decide to go down the rabbit hole.
And was Cheryl doubting when you started studying the CES letter and Book of Mormon? Was Cheryl doubting yet or not yet?
She was, interestingly, in April of 2019, her temple recommend was set to expire. And this was, a month before Wes came home from his mission. And she said, I don't want to renew it. Because she she didn't believe anymore. She was like basically just supporting me in the calling because she thought it was something I enjoyed, which I did. And she thought that, you know, she was supporting a hobby that like any good spouse would support someone in a hobby. But the problem is that supporting me like that meant that she also had to publicly portray an image, right? I mean, she spoke in stake conference when we asked our wives to speak because we wanted to have more women speakers and things like that. We're trying to be progressive, right? And so Cheryl did what she needed to do to try to support me publicly, but she was like, Temple recommend with Wes being how he was on his mission, about to come home and struggling so much. He's like, I can't do it. I just can't do it. And so that raised the question of whether I could continue in my calling. If I have a spouse who doesn't have a Temple recommend, can you still be in the stake presidency?
Yeah, because it's the wife of a Mormon leader's job to be spiritual arm candy. Like, you know, spiritual trophy wife, spiritual, you know, arm candy. She's just there to make you look like your family's doing what they should be doing. So for a woman to kind of step off the train or to go off script is a non-trivial thing, especially when your husband is in a stake presidency. That's a scary, bold move.
Yeah, it was very bold.
Cheryl.
Good for her. I love her for it. Yeah, it got to the point where the stake president had to, you know, reach out to the area authority and ask the question. You know, if Evan's wife doesn't renew, he didn't use my name. He said if a counselor has a wife who doesn't renew the recommend, can they continue to serve? And the answer from the area authority was, if the wife is having doubts that look like they're temporary, then you know counselor can continue to serve until she gets over her doubts and gets her renewal done, right? But if the doubts are going to be more permanent and she's not going to have a recommend for a long time, then the counselor should probably be released. And so 2 weeks later, after a lot of discussion, and I was telling Cheryl, look, I will get released. Please let me get released. And I told her this many times as a bishop too. I said, look, I'll ask to be released. And she said, no, because then I'll feel like a failure as a wife. I'm not supporting you in something you want to do. It's like this vicious circle where I want to be there for her, but she wants to be there for me, and we both can't do it at the same. We can't make each other happy because we feel like we're going to disappoint each other either way. It's like a prisoner dilemma. We can't solve it. And finally, she just said, "I'll just renew it." Like we talked about how she could nuance her way through the whole recommend interview questions. That sustaining could mean that you just don't publicly criticize. It doesn't mean you have to agree. That, for tithing, if she doesn't want to be paying any, we don't have to be paying necessarily tithing to the church. We can pay it to good causes. We can, she can do that with any money. So we nuanced it a lot, even belief in God and Jesus. Like we nuanced a bunch, and she made it through Temple Recommend interview, which she hated. She didn't like. She's like, I don't want to do, but I'll do it because I know you feel like you're doing good, Evan. You're helping the church change, so I'll do it for you. I
don't think the church one of the saddest people I've ever met. One of the most sad stories I've ever met was when I met a woman who was just having her feminist awakening while her husband had been called as bishop over her. And she was almost suicidal, like going to the bathroom during sacrament meeting to throw up kind of thing. Wow. Like, I don't think, like from the church's standpoint, there's a degree to which we're all just like, oh, good job for putting progressives in there to lead, because it's a breath of fresh air and it creates a bigger tent for all the other members, although we acknowledge that maybe it's just out of self-preservation. But I don't think the church leaders probably realize how stressful that is for a mixed faith family to be put in high levels of leadership.
For sure. Very stressful. And so, I was dealing with April 2019. That happened with Cheryl's
Because you
Temple
represent the church.
You do.
And
you
all
have
the
to
things
maintain
your
an
other
image.
family members are like starting to hate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I would have conversations with my family when I was bishop and in the stake presidency because I was just one minor example. I was nuanced enough where I was like, it's a stupid thing that people don't watch rated R movies because they think the church, that's like a commandment. It's dumb. It's not a commandment.
He's a big movie buff.
Yeah, I
I
love
think that
movies.
might have been a little bit selfish.
Yeah, it was kind of selfish. But I was like, look, it's dumb. It's not a commandment. It's just the random comment that, Benson made. It's not binding doctrine. It's silly, right? But I told my family, I said, you don't need to tell people that we watch rated R movies, because that's going to cause me drama as a church leader. I'm going to get criticized. I'm going to get, flack, blah, blah, blah. So I wasn't trying to be deceptive, but I was just telling my family, look, there's some stuff that we just keep private because it just doesn't need to be out there, and it causes me problems if you talk about it.
Or I think the other thing you told us this about was like wearing our Sunday clothes all day long. Because I know that was a big thing in our ward, is like some families
did that, yeah.
Some families did that and some families didn't. And we're like, oh, well, the bishop's family doesn't do it.
Yeah.
So you guys are less righteous. I'm like,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I put on a T-shirt, I guess.
I was like, guys, I told my kids, don't tell people that you don't wear your church clothes. It just doesn't matter. Just don't make my calling harder than it has to be. Just keep some things private. But yeah, I mean, having to have that kind of publicly facing thing is pressure for sure. And I guess to go back to the question, John, of what prompted me to go down the rabbit hole, April 2019, Cheryl's Temple Recommend issue. May 2019, West comes home early from his mission. June 2019, Owen's he's about to be ordained an elder, and everyone's just like hating it. And I'm thinking, what am I doing to my family, right? And that's why I woke up in the middle of the night, just panicked. And I spent the next 20 hours straight on the internet, just figuring out how Joseph Smith might have written the Book of Mormon. And it was a rabbit hole that was really, really enlightening to me. I hadn't explored the non-church friendly sources to that point, and there's a ton out there. There's a lot out there about how he did it. So, you gonna say something?
Yeah, I mean, I when people say, they go down a rabbit hole, I don't think they understand like what the difference is between a normal person rabbit hole and a lawyer's rabbit hole, because I think I don't know how many. It's got to be thousands of hours that you spent at this point,
yeah.
where it's like
So many.
Like I don't know. I joke with all my friends that he's got like a couple PhDs in theology at this point, because it wasn't just the Book of Mormon. After the Book of Mormon, I think he moved on to the Bible and
we'll get there.
Yeah,
we'll get there. But I decided at this point that I was going to read the Book of Mormon again, because I saw from my research online that there was a real plausible way Joseph could have made it up.
Do you remember what would you have read?
Mormon Think was the first one I came across. Yeah, mormonthink.com, I think.
The classic.
Yep, yep. And that just led me to a bunch of other places. Yeah. But I started seeing that the idea that Joseph was illiterate was kind of baloney. He could write a decent letter. The idea that he was uneducated was also not really accurate. He had as much education. He had more education than a lot of people of his day. Like they were homeschooled, right? And he had teachers in the family, and his brother Eyring went to Dartmouth for private education, and so like he was not coming from a hillbilly yokel type background. He had a lot of resources available to him. That he was very proficient in the Bible. That he was a Methodist exhorter at the camp revivals and stuff. Like he was not this guy that just suddenly randomly had an angel give him a book that he miraculously translated. It didn't happen that way. Mm-hmm. But I still was like, okay, maybe. But it's still a pretty remarkable work. Like it's still miraculous that he was able to do this in like, this 90 days that they say, whatever, that he did it. I was like, okay, so there's got to be something to this, right? There's got to be a way that God was involved. So I said, I'm going to read the Book of Mormon again. And
would you have found out that Mosiah was written first?
Not yet.
Okay.
I did not know that yet.
Yeah,
that's a big thing. That's happened.
A big thing.
Yeah, that happened a little later. That's after I started listening to Mormon stories.
Yeah, if you write the middle of a book first, it's easier to keep track of the story.
Yeah,
especially if you're writing the beginning at the end.
Right. I mean, as far as how Joseph could have done it, practically speaking, the Mormon discussion series that you guys are doing. LDS discussions with Mike. Yeah, those are phenomenal. Those are phenomenal. Really love those. And those are all honestly based on the John Hamer episodes where he walks through how it could have practically been done by Joseph a few hours a day with his head in a hat with pre-prepared materials that he had over years and years and years.
Yeah.
And dictating, it's not not that miraculous. And I did find that night of 20 hours of research, I was a traveling to type thing that was in the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon. There was a lot of 19th century English that got corrected. And the dictation errors I found that night, I was like, whoa, you can clearly see that he's not translating from plates. He's just dictating and using kind of circumlocution to find words that he forgot he had mentioned before and that he was kind of making around. So I found a lot of stuff that led me to believe that was very plausible that Joseph just made it up. So then I said, I'm going to read it. I'm going to give fair time, right? Because I had some youth, and when I was bishop, I had some youth that went through some faith crisis. And I always counseled them, give the same amount of time. I didn't want to be the type of bishop like, don't look at those materials, don't look at those resources. I just said, give the same amount of time to the critical stuff that you do to the church family stuff. Balance it out. So that's what I decided to do. I studied the Book of Mormon, and I took every verse that I read that I could possibly think was like Joseph made it up. I Googled it. I spent the next 3 months, so much time.
Lawyer rabbit hole.
Yeah, just finding what about this verse? What about this? What about building the ship? What about all these things? Whoa, one of the episodes I found, John Larson's how to build a transoceanic vessel. Holy cow, that blew my mind. I was like, wow, there's no way Nephi could have made that boat. But anyway, I go through all that process over probably the next 3 months. About a month into it, the stake president, I told my stake president I was having a faith crisis. I told him I'm not sure about the Book of Mormon.
Wow.
And he told me at the same time that he was going to be moving. So I was like, the pressure is on for me to figure out.
Because the general authority is going to come.
Because in 2 months, the general authority is going to come, and I'm going to be interviewed for being stake president. So I got to figure this out. So I just doubled down on reading quicker, finding it, doing a ton of research still. And my stake president gave me the book, A Case for the Book of Mormon by Tad Collister. He's former general authority.
Excellent book.
I thought at the time that it was. I sincerely, I read it and I was like, oh yeah, this has some good points. Now looking back at it, I've learned so much more. It's really weak apologetics. RFM, Radio Free Mormon, and Bill Reel have a great episode on Mormonism Live where they dissect that book, and it's not good. It's not strong. But at the time, I was kind of grasping for anything, right? And so I was like, okay, that's fine, good enough. It was about a week and a half before the stake conference was where the new stake president was going to get called, that I got my answer. I was driving on the freeway. I was towards the back of the Book of Mormon. I was in Moroni. I was in the chapter about infant baptisms. And I thought, why the heck is this chapter in a book from ancient America? Why are they talking about infant baptisms? There's no record that there's any infant baptisms going on. There's no record that there's any
baptisms,
period. Christianity, nothing. Oh, I actually knew from a long time.
We're talking about for those who don't know, this is 500 AD.
Yeah.
What, Mesoamerica?
Yeah.
Mayans, Aztecs.
Right.
What's the likelihood that they're sitting around thinking
about infant baptism? Right.
Like Catholic versus Protestant.
Right.
Christian baptism.
And that was just one of the things. I had found so many other things, like all of the quotes from the New Testament, paraphrased quotes from New Testament that are said by Alma and Nephi a few hundred years before Jesus. There's hundreds of them. They're all over. And I came across Deutero-Isaiah, right? That was a big one for me. I was like, how in the world did the parts of Isaiah that biblical scholars now say were not written by Isaiah, but were written, later, they could not have been on the brass plates that Lehi and his family brought 600 years before Christ to the American continent, and
they hadn't been written yet.
How are they there? And then how is the Sermon on the Mount? That was just compiled from biblical. From some other sources, from a bunch of different collected quotes that are attributed to Jesus. How does he give the exact same speech there when that speech wasn't even written down, or those sayings collected into a sermon until 100 AD or whenever it was that Matthew was written? How can you? So I found a lot of those things along the way. And
basically the LDS discussion series or CES letter or Mormon think. Just the rabbit hole, right?
But so the CES letter, I had read it, right? But I had not spent a ton of time on it because I was like, I just spent more of my time on Fair Mormon. I read, but I was like, I'm just going to the things that I'm debating and worrying about. But the thing that what I came to when I was driving was, it doesn't matter. Maybe Joseph, when he was translating the plates, he was aware of Moroni was talking about a theological debate happening at the time, and Joseph didn't understand the theological debate, or it wasn't pertinent to 19th century Americans, or modern day people reading the Book of Mormon, and so he translated the debate, the theological ideas, the debate, as a theological debate of today. So I was like taking the extension of the horse as a taper type thing and applying it to the whole theological like topic that was being discussed in those chapters. I was like, oh, you know what? He's just channeling a different theological issue. And it's the one that's most important to us anyway. So that's fine. That's fair. It's not that the Book of Mormon is true. It's that it's true enough. It doesn't have to be literal. It's true enough. It's fine.
Checkmate, Book of Mormon haters.
Yeah. And then I went to the temple. Cheryl and I both did. We had a good feeling that things would work out fine in the coming stake conference. And then I had the stake conference happen. So we went into the stake conference actually feeling like, you know what, we're good with the church. Church is fine. We can make it work, even though it's hard. But we're doing good to try to soften people's hearts and minds, and we can continue on this path. Then I had the experience with Elder McCune, John A. McCune. He was the general authority who was assigned to come and interview for the new stake president. And I had my morning interview again, same sort of experience where they just kind of ask you those quick questions. But I came out of that interview and I called Cheryl. I said, I don't think he liked me. I got the distinct impression that he was not happy with me. He asked me what I thought the vision for the stake should be. I said, love, charity. And I
wrong answer.
He seemed a little, I don't know. He just didn't seem to like that. But I just didn't get the impression that he liked me. So I didn't think I was going to, I was worried that I wasn't going to get a call back interview later that afternoon. I was kind of mad with that idea because I'd only been in the stake presidency for 2 years. Typically it's a 9-year calling. Yes, I was getting released because the stake president was moving. And so the counselors are automatically released when the stake president moves. But I thought,
it looks bad.
It looks bad. Oh yeah, people would look. The whole stake would look and be like, "Wow, President Smith only served for 2 years. He didn't get recalled as a counselor. Like, what the heck?"
Yeah.
But that wasn't so much the image I was worried about, because at that point, I honestly didn't really put much stock into like the image of being a leader. It was more about the idea that I couldn't continue to be I couldn't continue to do what I was doing and trying to help.
That there wasn't space for you.
There wasn't space for me, and it pissed me off that it was probably because Wes was gay. I thought that, I just caught that vibe in the morning meeting that he knew. But I did get called back 2 hours after I expected to get a call, maybe an hour after I expected the call to come. I got called back and I had to drive half hour to the stake center and met with Elder McCune. Cheryl met with his area authority companion for 5 minutes to do a quick, are you worthy for your husband to serve in this stake? And then she sat out in the hall with our then I think 13-year-old daughter, because she was with us on that Saturday and just ended up having to come back with us. My interview with Elder McCune lasted what was supposed to be like the quick 5 minutes, 10 minutes, are you worthy? And then he was going to call Cheryl in to extend the calling to me to at least continue to serve in the stake presidency as a counselor, because that's why you got a call back. He talked to me for over 70 minutes. And that meant that we were late to a training meeting that was starting that we were both supposed to be in and talking in. And Cheryl was out in the hall for, over an hour, wondering what the heck is Evan in the room with this general authority talking about. And it was all about Wes. He said to me at the very beginning of the interview, I sensed that you, and this is in chapter 9 of my book, I relate all of this, but he said, I know you've had some tough times recently, that your son's come home from his mission and he's left the church. And I was like, well, I'm thinking, how does he know this? But I think he actually told me that he heard from someone that day. And I didn't really want to talk about it, but I could tell he did. And so we just started kind of having a debate, and it lasted for a long time. Yeah.
A debate?
Yeah, it was a debate. It was very respectful. The tone was, we weren't yelling, but it was very much a substantive, conceptual debate on the issue.
Are you able to, do you want to even characterize the nature of the sides and the positions?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell some of the points if you want. I can go through them. I can read I'll just highlight some of the things I wrote about in my book. But
what if you tell it as a story? Like, this is what he told me.
Yeah, that's what I'll do. So I'll just kind of look at my notes though, because I don't want to miss anything up. The first thing he kind of tried to relate to me is that I shouldn't be happy that Wes had left the church, because you shouldn't be happy when anyone leaves the church. Sin is sin. It's not justified. I told him about Wes's revelatory experience and that I believed it, that I believed God was okay with him leaving the church. And he said, no, he didn't believe that could have been an answer from God, because, sometimes people get answers that they want just because they want them bad enough, they'll get them for anything.
I mean, that cuts both ways, right?
Yeah. Yes, it does. And he said that, not all gay people are unhappy in the church, that some of them are celibate and stay and are happy, and some are mixed orientation marriages and are happy. And I said, statistically, that's garbage. That's like statistically, the vast majority of celibate members in the church have trauma, and the vast majority of people in mixed orientation marriages have trauma, and they don't succeed. Those marriages fail. And, he said, well, it's all about, life is hard, and you can figure it out, and you can be more stalwart. He drew an analogy to how parents might feel if their kids left the church to commit crimes, to how I might feel as my son leaving the church, kind of like that's how I should feel. And I said, well, my son leaving the church doesn't harm anyone. People committing crimes hurt other people, but Wes just wants to love someone. He just wants to have a family and be, And he said, oh, well, if gay couples adopt, then they are harming people because they're harming those kids that they adopt. And I said, there is a ton of psychological studies and proof that shows that kids raised by gay couples they fare really well, because those gay parents are so committed to being good parents. Like there's almost no area. I put this in my book, the studies here, but there's almost no area where there's so much agreement from the psychological community, from the professional organizations, that gay parenting is not harmful at all to children, and it's the opposite. It's the opposite.
And that's something that really bothered me too. I was like, you really think that two people are going to go through all of this to get married? Like all of the homophobia, all of the nonsense that comes with the homophobia in the bureaucracy, and beyond that, the cost of adopting or doing surrogacy, and you think that they're going to be bad parents after all that they haven't put in hours and hours and hours of thought. I don't know. It just rubbed me the wrong way compared to thinking about even my own parents. It was like they were my mom was 20 when she had me. She didn't know anything.
They're really young parents.
I mean, they knew each other 3 days before they got engaged.
Yeah, come on.
And so I don't know. That argument has always really rubbed me the wrong way, especially because the data is so conclusive. It's gay marriages are happier than straight marriages. And so maybe you guys should take a page out of our book, figure it out.
Yeah.
What are you laughing at, Gerardo?
Let's see. Elder McCune also said this took a while to get out.
Wait. But you said, well, I know the evidence points out.
Yeah, I said the evidence points out. And he says, I know some studies to the contrary, so we'll just have to let that one sit.
And of course, he gave you the citation.
No, he didn't. He just said, we'll just have to agree to disagree. And I said, okay, whatever, fine. Then he moved on. He said, maybe it's okay. Maybe God doesn't condemn gay people who decide to leave the church, because maybe it's like they have diminished agency, almost like how a trauma victim has an instinctive reaction in certain circumstances where they're triggered and they can't control how they behave. Maybe, having gay sexual orientation is the same sort of response. They can't control it. And I'm like, I don't like that idea. I really don't. I think that's demeaning and it's just insulting to someone who's finding love and companionship in their life, to call that a trauma response or similar to that. It's just not agent. That's just really bad. He talked about how the church uses tithing funds to not have people express affection on church property. I don't know why he brought that up. It seemed kind of weird that he would do that. But
I actually had an idea when I read that on your outline. To me, it was very significant when the November 15 policy was reversed on the next handbook of instructions. They included this rule, with this weird rule that had never been there before, that affection in church property could not be displayed.
Yeah.
And I think I read someone speculating, and I thought the same thing, that they were coming up with that rule so that homosexuals wouldn't display affection in church meetings, since the church had come out and said that they were going to treat heterosexuals the same as homosexuals.
Yeah, so you can't hold.
Yeah,
Heterosexual couples hold hands in church all the time.
Exactly, or they are like hugging
or having their arm around each other while they're sitting in the pew. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was kind of interesting. That the church was thinking about that.
Yeah, because that's true. They did update the handbook to kind of say that it was display, like discussing sexual orientation was not. Or
and that too.
They
discussing sexual orientation could not be done, and then
it's true. I didn't connect with those dots. That's probably what he was hearing in the general authority circles, right? Was discussion about updating the handbook like that. Yeah. He did talk a lot about how the law of chastity would not change. And this was 2 weeks after President Nelson gave his talk at BYU, where he talked about how the law of chastity will not change. It was his first talk that he gave in response to the exclusion policy being reversed. And President Nelson at BYU was like, God, we cannot change the laws that God has set down. And I think that's probably where Elder McCune why he was so fixated on this idea that the law of chastity will never change, because it was just barely been a mantra that President Nelson had been teaching.
Sorry to interject, but the problem with that statement that Nelson gave is the way he worded it, because he said the law of chastity has not changed.
Yes, that's true.
Because it's marriage between a man and a woman. And then it was changed on the transcript later, because obviously polygamy has existed, so he hasn't been between a man and a woman. Especially Nelson is married to 2 women eternally.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
No, that's actually a really good point. I brought up polygamy. I said, what about polygamy? The law of chastity changed before, it could change back. It could change again. And he said, oh, well, people use that line of argument. The LGBTQ opposition uses that line of argument. And I said, I don't like referring to gay people as the opposition. That doesn't feel right to me.
I like it. It's very, I'm like, I want the Imperial March every single time I walk into church. I want I want the Darth Vader thing. Yeah, give it to me.
I asked him if it was okay that I hoped for change. And this was the thing that I really wanted to get from him. I was like, look, is it okay that I hope that things can be different? And I used the analogy of the Savior in Gethsemane. I said, he's on his knees asking Heavenly Father, can this cup pass from me? Now you're talking about something that's so fundamental to Mormon doctrine. It's the atonement. Without the atonement, there is nothing, right? And even for the atonement, which is so fundamental, Christ was asking, hey, can this not happen? So I said, is it bad that I'm just asking, hey, can gays not suffer in the church? Can change happen so that they're not suffering? And he said, you shouldn't hope for change. You should just hope that the Savior works it out after this life. Works things out for people one by one after this life. And I said, well, how does that happen if here in this life they're suffering so much, and if all they had to do is look forward to the next life, that's going to cause them to want to die, to want to kill themselves, want to die by suicide. And he said that wasn't the only outcome, and that people exaggerate the suicidality, and it was a horrible, horrible conversation, the whole thing. But ultimately, we got to the place where he was okay extending me the calling to serve as counselor, because
that's remarkable.
Yeah, well,
as president or presidency member?
As a first counselor in the presidency, again, Stake Presidency, same calling I had. And I said to him, actually, we didn't go whether it was first or second. It was a counselor position. I don't remember what it was. Maybe I got demoted a second. I have no idea. But it was definitely a counselor calling. I had convinced him that I wasn't going to publicly cross any lines when it came to doctrine. That I had been doing this for years. I knew where the lines were. You could ask anybody in the stake if I ever crossed any lines, if I ever taught anything that was not church sanctioned, and nobody would tell you I would, and I will continue to do that. I don't want to get ahead of the brethren. That's not my place. I know how revelation comes to the church. It's not through up and up, it comes from the top down. I get it. And he was convinced enough to where he was okay doing it. I honestly think that he had heard, and I know several men put my name down. Most of the men put my name down as stake presidency, to be the next stake president. And the new stake president had obviously asked for me to serve. The new stake president had barely been a bishop for 1 year and got called. So I think he was looking at me as somebody who had way more experience than him, and he needed somebody. It would be nice to have somebody who already was in the calling, right? Because the other counselor in the stake presidency was moving too. So I was the sole guy left. I was the sole guy left for any consistency from one stake presidency to the next.
Was it the first meeting that you made it sound like you talked about love and he didn't like that? That
was the morning meeting. Yeah,
I know, but I'm just saying, would an emphasis in love make McCune disqualify you as the obvious choice for stake president?
If he perhaps knew I had a gay son from a notation on a record or something, okay. And if he thought that love, emphasis on love, translated to, because you think about what Elder Oaks did a week after this experience in General Conference in October of 2019. President Oaks gave a talk where he said,
the two
great commandments, where you can, loving God is more important than loving others, and you can love others too much. And so, maybe McCune was hearing those sort of things as well and thought, oh, if someone's so focused on love, then that can cross the line.
Which I'm sorry, but for me, I've already expressed some of the reasons why I think that this church can't possibly be the Church of Christ. But for Oaks to say it that bluntly was really shocking to me. Even though I was in a cocoon and didn't want to hear anything from the church, he told me that line. I was like, well, you're kind of showing your hand. That's bad. That goes against every single piece of fundamental Christian doctrine.
Yeah, there's so in my book I have many, many pages of analysis where that contradicts Scripture over and over. Well, the New Testament clearly teaches that loving others is what it means to love God. They're hand in hand, and you can't prioritize them. And if you start prioritizing them, you're contradicting what the Savior and his apostles after he died, what they taught. It's very clear. Say
again what Oaks taught.
He said that loving God is more important, and the first thing you should do, not loving others, and there's an order to them, right? You can love others too much, so that's you need to remember to love God
don't love
first.
The gay people too much. Is that basically.
Yeah, in that same chapter in my book, that I talk about how other general authorities after Oaks gave that talk, they followed that same teaching. I think Elder Vincent did, and it's a pernicious line of thought that makes people think that putting rules over people, prioritizing the well-being of the institution and the well-being of just following and kind of adoring the leaders is more important than doing what people need in their lives to be healthy and happy. That just really hit me hard. But anyway, going back, that was a week later. So going back to the experience with McCune, I don't doubt that this was a message or a theme that had been talked about amongst the general authority circles. That and the law of chastity will never change, and loving God is first. Keeping the commandments is more important than loving other people.
He says, I can read the quote. He says, it's all throughout, but this is Elder Oaks. Our walk opposes recruitment away from the covenant path, and it denies support to any who lead people away from the Lord. And he says, our walk demands that we do not compromise our commandments, but show forth a full measure of understanding and love. Our walk must be considerate of children who are uncertain about their sexual orientation, but it discourages premature labeling because in most children, such uncertainty decreases significantly over time.
All right. I want you to hold on to that one, Gerardo, because I want to come back to that in my next conversation with the next general authority. In 2020.
All right.
In February 2020, I had another conversation.
Are you going to talk about the special witness?
Yeah. So the way that the interview ended, stood up, Elder McCune shook my hand, and he said, I told you all of these things as a special witness for Christ, sort of the name of Christ. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he looked me in the eye and he told me that, What was interesting was one thing, maybe I forgot to mention this. Over the course of the conversation, probably 3, maybe 4 times, he leaned forward in his chair, looked me in the eye, and told me that if I lost my faith, if I left the church over this issue, if I lost my testimony, that I would lose everything. My family, Cheryl would leave me, I would lose my family, and that people who leave the church aren't really happy. They say they're happy one time, but they're not, they really aren't. And I told him, I said, I'm not leaving the church. What are you talking about? I said, I've gone through this experience. I have a testimony. I've filled the Savior's love. I love serving. I love trying to do good in the church. Like, I'm not leaving. So I think he kind of regrets that he said that, but he did tell me that 3 or 4 times that I would lose Cheryl and my kids if I lost my faith. And then at the end said, as a special witness of Christ, I've told you all these things. And that was just, Cheryl refers to that as ecclesiastical abuse. And I think she's right. So then she gets called, he calls her into the room. And again, we're late to this meeting, right, that we're supposed to be in. Otherwise, there's 100 people in the other room waiting, wondering what the heck's going on. They're doing the meeting without the presiding general authority and a member of the stake presidency there. She comes in, sits down, and says, what's going on? And she sees my face, and she says that she knows me so well. She's never seen me that distraught. She knew that I was just eaten up, and I was just really, really bothered. I'm glad that she knows me so well, because she was able to do something and take the step into the darkness before we could see the light that I was too, I think, scared and too conditioned to have the courage to do. But she said, is this about Wes? And Elder McCune said, yeah. And Cheryl said, I don't understand why Wes is an issue when there's other members of the stake presidency and other members and other leaders in the stake who have children who are not active in the church, and they don't get asked about their children. They don't get the same level of scrutiny. So why does it matter that Wes is gay and that he's doing what is best for him in his life and what makes him healthy and happy? And Elder McCune said, I can tell you're upset, Sister Smith. President Smith, why don't you calm Sister Smith down while I go into this next meeting?
That line bothers me so much. Oh.
And I'll come back after the meeting's over, and we'll continue the conversation and continue extending you the calling. Yeah, calm down your wife was not the right thing to say, because he left, and it was just Cheryl and me in the room, and she was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't hide my love for my son. I can't hide the feeling I have that what is best for him is what he's doing. And I can't feel ashamed for being a good parent and knowing that what's best for his health and happiness is what we're doing. So we left. We stood up and walked out of the church. And when we got to the parking lot, she was sobbing so hard that I had to hold her. She wondered if she was condemning our family. I said, no, we're just ahead of our time. Meaning that I still had belief that the church would change. We drove a half hour back to home. We were there for about 20 minutes, and I said, I want to go back, because you don't give an opportunity to talk to general authority like this very often. So I drove back. The adult session had ended by then, so it was like 9 o'clock at night. And the general authority and the area authority, Elder McCune and his area authority companion at that point, were both ready to talk to me. This time around, it was the tone was much different. Elder McCune was conciliatory. He said he had had time to think, and he had talked to his area authority companion about the situation, and wanted to apologize if he was harsh. And then I spent 2 hours talking with him, and I talked about how temple sealings could happen. I talked about Taylor Petry's article that I had read, and I talked about the science of sexual orientation, that it was epigenetic thing occurring in the womb, that it was not chosen, that science is definitive on this thing. It's that we know as much about why people are born with the sexual orientation that they are, that we know about why they're born right or left-handed. And it's a similar developmental process. Like, we understand so much about the science now. Why are we hurting people over this issue just because of the way they're born? Why are we treating people differently? That goes against the scriptures. And I just went on and on and on. And it was a good conversation. They asked me at the end if Cheryl would want to talk to them. And I said, I'll have to go home and ask her. I said, she's pretty upset, and I'm really mad that you made her cry, the worst I've ever seen her cry in my life. We are very close, and I hate that happened to Cheryl. And they told me at the end of that interview, the follow-up, that they felt like they needed to extend the calling to someone else. And so the next morning...
Do you think that decision that was made previous to the...
I think as soon as we left the church building, they made the decision. They didn't call anybody till the next morning. I know that they didn't actually get someone there until like 7 a.m. the next morning to receive the calling. But yeah, as soon as we left, I think they were like, and I actually wonder if Elder McCune, he said when he was leaving to go into the other meeting, he said, Sister Smith, I feel like I've been sent here to minister to your family more than even to reorganize the stake presidency. Which is a little odd because that kind of ministering didn't happen.
Yeah, how was he doing?
No, it's not happening at all. Like we haven't had any other contact. So I wonder if he actually wanted us to leave.
Yeah.
I can't understand why he behaved the way he did otherwise. I mean, contrast that experience with him to Elder Perkins. Like the way he was in our interview was amazing, right?
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure Elder Perkins knew he had a gay son. I can't imagine that Elder McCune, I think he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like this, everybody wants Evan to keep serving, but I'm worried that he's, going to lead the church in the wrong direction. So what can I do to make Evan just kind of walk away? And it worked. I walked away.
I also think, I don't know, just to talk a little bit more about my mom. Because I mentioned during my piece that like she was really depressed for a significant portion of while I was growing up. And I don't know, we've talked a lot about it since then. And I think that was kind of like the floodgates moment for her, where like all of this pain that she'd been dealing with for years, all the depression, all of the, the nights where you're getting home late and from, church callings and stuff like that. And I think it finally just, you reach a breaking point, right? And I don't know. I just want to also just emphasize how strong she was to even endure all that in the first place.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know. I admire her so much. And I don't know. It's just, it goes so, like the way that the church hurts people goes so, it hurts so many different types of people that maybe you don't even expect. I don't know how many people really understood how much damage the church was doing to my mom. But it's like another thing for me that I'm like, you can't hurt my mom like that and not apologize. And I don't think the church will ever apologize for the way it's treated its women.
Yeah. Elder McCune did apologize the next morning. Cheryl was willing to come back. Like, again, speaking to her strengths, she was willing to come back. She prayed in the car with me before we went into that meeting. It was after the general session of Stake Conference where I got released. I bore a brief testimony in that general session and just said, I'm sorry that I missed all the meetings yesterday. I had a personal family thing. And I actually said, my son Wes came home from his mission early because he's gay. And I could kind of see in the crowd of the corner of my eye, Elder McCune kind of like flinched, like, what are you talking about?
That's not said at every transition of stake presidency.
Yep. And I bawled, like, after that testimony. I bared testimony of the love of Christ. Like, I shared a text that a friend had sent me because he knew this. Everybody knew what was happening, right, in the stake. They knew something was going on. And he sent me a text saying, unconditional love is the Savior's way, full stop. And so I shared that. I said, I got this message from a friend. I didn't say who the friend was, but I said, amen. And then I sat down. And I got so many people coming up afterwards and just giving me hugs and saying they were sorry that things had happened. And the general authority spent a lot of time in his talk talking about the divine nature of reorganizing stake presidencies and how, revelation is so involved and things like that. So,
the mighty hand of God at work.
Yeah. But Cheryl was willing to come, and she, after that meeting, we met with general authority, with Elder McCune and the area authority, and with the outgoing stake president and the new stake president. They were all there. And she, for 40 minutes, was just amazing. She said, she didn't name names, but she's like, there's 10 LGBTQ people in our ward that we know. After Evan started showing that he was open to being LGBTQ friendly, people started coming in and talking to him. There's all these kids in my seminary class that I taught. There's, the church is really dumb for not finding a way to embrace these people because it's tearing families apart. And then the thing I remember her most saying was, I want all of you to think about how much you love your wives and think about the next time you want to be with them intimately, that you have to be with a man instead. And that's not something that I think you all want to do, right? She goes, that's what you're asking gay members of the church to do, is to do something that feels contrary to who they are and how they're born. And she went on for a really long time and was super impressive. And Elder McCune at the end of that gave us an apology and said that he was sorry for how he had treated us. So, yeah.
So she kind of got her apology. Cheryl got her apology from McCune. Kudos to him.
Yeah, kudos to him for that. I give him credit for that. Cheryl did a post a few days later on Facebook that kind of went viral. Got the attention of a lot of people, including Richard Osler from Listen, Learn, and Love, who's a great man. He's a really good man. He flew out to Boston and met with us, ministered to us. Like the ministering that I didn't get from Elder McCune, I really did feel like I got from Richard. Just a good guy.
Yeah, I guess with the whole apology thing, you can apologize for the specific incident, but I think my mom has endured years of feeling neglected within the church that no one has ever apologized for.
Yeah.
And I know that it's a systemic problem with how women are treated in the church, and the church doesn't seem to acknowledge it at all. And that, I think, is more in need of an apology than anything.
100%. Yeah, that church needs to apologize for the way it treats women and the inequality that's there. The church needs to apologize for the inequality that it has had and continues to struggle with respect to black members of the church and Native Americans and LGBTQ. Like, there's so much damage that the church needs to apologize for that I don't know if it ever will. I mean, President Oak says the church doesn't give apologies, so I don't know if we'll ever see that. But anyway, after Cheryl did her Facebook post, I kind of decided I wanted to do something and write something. And so I started to write a post that turned into a book in short, because I had to be so comprehensive on addressing every single point I had ever heard and every argument I'd ever heard from someone that the church could never change its position on gay marriage. And so I spent from October 2019 until February 2020 working on this draft. I spent the time I would have spent on my calling, basically, doing this. And in February of 2020, Elder Eyring, President Eyring, was in town for Clayton Christensen, another general authority's funeral. And I had, by that time, connected with some other people who had been trying to effect change and gotten email addresses of the brethren. So I emailed them all a copy of my manuscript, and said, President Eyring, while you're in town, I'd love to meet with you. I mentioned that that President Nelson came to my dad's viewing, and that meant a lot to me, and just kind of kept it friendly. But I did say I had this bad experience with Elder McCune, and I had Elder McCune copied on the email, and I said, I'm going to publish this in a lot of social media groups that I'm in, and it's going to be out there. It talks about the bad experience with Elder McCune, but more importantly, it talks about how the church could change on this issue. And I pointed them to certain parts of the book, asking them to pay attention to those parts. One part in particular I wanted them to look at was a chapter where I say, you don't even have to the church doesn't even have to start calling gay marriage okay. It can continue to say, oh, it's bad, but say that there's an exception, right? They already do that in a lot of circumstances. They allow for certain exceptions to occur. One that I wrote about in my book that that Cheryl didn't want me to include, but I think it's important to have that distinction, is the way the church treats abortion, right? You have women, and I talked to several other women about this before I decided to include in the book, and I softened the way I describe it. So I hope I do this appropriately here. And I know it's an incredibly sensitive topic, and I don't want to come across the wrong way. But a woman who is raped has a biological condition that she doesn't choose. And the church says, in that circumstance, if you've counseled with the bishop, you can do something that would otherwise be a sin. You can have an abortion, right? It's not a sin in that circumstance because there's extenuating circumstances. So I said, well, the church acknowledges now that being gay is not a choice. It's a biological condition that you don't choose. So why, and, abortion is like unto murder, apparently. That's what President Nelson has said. And murder is a more severe sin than the law of chastity. So why isn't the church willing to make that exception in this case and let people be married? And I understand an abortion is a hard, traumatic ordeal, and gay marriage is the opposite. It's an amazing thing. So this analogy sucks for a lot of reasons, and I totally get that. But from a legalistic perspective, the church makes an exception to allow for something that would be a sin in one circumstance, but it doesn't in the other. And I tried to have, I drew attention to that and to some other things in my email. I think I wasn't expecting a response from anyone when I sent that. But a few days later, I got a phone call from a member of the North America Northeast Area Presidency, Elder Elder Haynie. And he said that a couple of apostles read my email and they wanted to meet with me. I was hoping to meet with President Eyring while he was in town, but that didn't, I thought that was a long shot, but I was happy to get a response. So I told Elder Haynie that I was actually going to be in Utah the coming week for my mom's 70th birthday party. And he said, why don't you meet us at church? Why don't we meet you and your wife, meet me at church headquarters? He was willing to instead come to fly and meet with us in our home. But when I told him we were coming there already, he said, okay, come meet me in my office. So we did that, and he said, I want to have your stake president be with us. So he flew the church flew our stake president out to Salt Lake to meet with us too. So in February 2020, I met with Elder Haynie in his office, and we met with Cheryl, and we met for 3 hours and had a good discussion. I mean, he is a personable guy. He's a lawyer he's actually practiced at my firm for 25 years, so they found the right guy to talk to me. He started off our discussion by letting me know that he was familiar with our situation because he had actually, on the plane ride home, Elder McCune flew home from our stake conference reorganization. He ended up sitting next to Elder Haynie and spent the most of the time on the plane talking to him about how he had done with our situation and what had happened.
The guy just happened to have been a partner at your firm?
He just happened, yeah. I mean, my firm's big. It's like over 3,000 lawyers, so maybe.
Seems really coincidental.
Yeah, it is. I don't know. He happened to be there, and he happened to be on a plane ride with McCune right after it happened.
Right next to him.
Yeah. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But he started off our conversation saying that, well, first Cheryl asked him, are we here to talk about discipline for Evan? Is he here to have church discipline? Because he wrote this manuscript that he's, saying he's going to publish. And Elder Haynie said, no, we're not here. I've read his whole thing. It was over 100 pages. He had marked it up. He had put a bunch of tabs in it and stuff. He joked with me that I needed a word limit like litigators get when they have to submit a brief to a judge, and he clearly knew I wasn't a litigator because I didn't do that. And he said, nothing you've written in here is false doctrine, and there's no reason for you to be disciplined over it. And I think that's significant because if people look at my book, there's stuff in there. Like I was still, when I wrote it, I was a believing member, and I hope that people listening to this recommend it to their believing member, friends, and family, because I really sincerely, it came from a place of firm belief that the church could change. And I was saying things like, I have quotes in there about how Elder McConkie admitted that prophets err in doctrine. I have quotes in there about how, the brethren are imperfect. And I have discussions about how the priesthood ban was considered doctrine and yet it changed. There's a lot of stuff in there that I think a lot of members of the church are unfamiliar with, that it's good for them to hear that this general authority thought that wasn't anything that was worthy of me getting in trouble about. So it's a book that really does say the church is wrong on this issue and it needs to change, and yet Elder Haynie didn't condemn me for writing it. He did seem to want to have me not publish the part about Elder McCune, that chapter. And he said he used the idea that I wouldn't hit my target audience if I included that chapter. He said, who's your target audience? And I said, well, believing members. And because they're the ones that need to have a change of heart on this issue. And he said, well, if your target audience is believing members, you should probably leave that out. And I talked to some other people afterwards, and I don't want to leave that out. I think it's very important that what I did instead was I added a whole section about why I think it's good for the church that I include it. Because I think it's good for church members to see that a general authority apologized. It's good for the church. It's good for the church to see, to have this discussion be out there. And it's the same reason why I'm doing this today. I'm being transparent and talking about and not disclosing, not divulging, not withholding names anymore either.
Do you get a sense that one of the main reasons you were called to visit with
Elder Haynie?
Elder Haynie, was to prevent or discourage you from publishing the book, or at least that section?
Yes. Yeah, I get that impression. He was willing to talk about everything, but I think that was clearly a motivating factor, was to try to not have me talk about that experience with Elder McCune.
He also has some comments about the tone of the book, right?
Yeah, the tone of the book was angry, that I would alienate my believing audience if I kept that tone.
I was proud that he made a comparison there.
Oh yeah, he did. He said that the tone of my book was similar to the tone from a Mormon Stories episode where people are just going on and doing a tell-all. So
Can't have that.
he's aware of Mormon Stories. I told him, I said, look, I have no intention of doing Mormon Stories, and I didn't at the time. It was true. It was very true. He actually asked me to keep a lot of the conversation that we were having confidential. He said I could tell people that I met with him and things like that, but he wouldn't appreciate me going on Mormon Stories and disclosing this. So I'm actually doing something that, I told him I didn't intend to do. And people may look at me and say, Evan, that's really bad that you're doing this, and da-da-da. And I, again, at the time, I was sincere in not having that intention. When I published my book a few months later, I didn't name Elder McCune, and I'm sincere in not wanting any, anything negative to come his way, because I'm glad he apologized. But 2 years have happened. 2 years have gone by since, where I've seen the harm and the deaths much more prominently. I'm in a parents group on Facebook called I'll Walk With You. It's a parents group for LGBTQ Mormon parents of LGBTQ kids, and the stories you see in there, I am just convinced that if we keep letting behind the door, closed door conversations be the only time that general authorities are vulnerable, that there will not be change in the church. We need to start having that discomfort that causes change. In my book, one of the arguments I make is that change in the church happens when it's forced to, right? When the church is forced to change. But I say, but that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. Think about the church being forced to change like a trial that we have in our lives, whether it's health trial or whatever it is, that we're struggling personally. We pray to God, and because we're struggling and more vulnerable as individuals, we get revelation from God that's we wouldn't have got otherwise, because we're more open to it, because we're being challenged. So I say, look, that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the church to be challenged and to be on the ropes, because then maybe the prophet will pray and get inspiration that he wouldn't otherwise be open to. And, I think that's even more true today. I don't believe, I may do a little teaser here or spoiler, but I don't believe in the revelation aspect or in God even anymore. But I do think it's true that when an institution or an individual is kind of on the ropes and being faced with pressure like that they can get ideas and see ways to change that they otherwise wouldn't have seen if they weren't pressured. So,
1,000%. Like when I started Mormon Stories in 2004, I had a lot of friends who were this is one of the reasons, Gerardo, why some in the Mormon studies community aren't big fans. There was this prevailing wisdom based on some experience that, like, once upon a time, the church was crafting an apology to, black members of the church for kind of the priesthood ban and the temple ban. But then somehow the news got wind that apology was in the works, and then it was scuttled. And so there was a conventional wisdom amongst the Mormon studies or the progressive Mormon crowd that if you make a stink about something, then you're only going to delay the eventual progress that's going to get made, that the brethren will actually run the other direction if they feel like publicly they're challenged or told that they are pressured to make a change. And I remember just very clearly when Marlon Jensen, while he was still church historian, while he was a general authority, I don't know if you remember this, Gerardo, he goes out to Oakland in Carolyn Pearson's stake, and he gives like a fireside, and he ends the fireside by saying, hey, I don't apologize on behalf of the church because I don't have permission to do that. But on behalf of Marlon Jensen, I apologize to all the LGBTQ members of the stake for what the church has put them through.
Wow.
And immediately people reach out to me and are like, John, you can't believe what Elder Jensen said. And so I'm like, whoa, should we publish this, right? And the whole blogger knock was like, John, don't you dare publish it. Don't spread the word about this, because their two justifications were somehow it's going to retard progress if word gets out that an apology was made, because you're, quote, getting ahead of the brethren. Yep. And I do think that the brethren don't like it when you get ahead of them.
No. Yeah.
I think that's actually factual. But the other, argument was, this was funny. All the intellectuals were like, Marlon Jensen has a chance of being called as an apostle. But if word gets out that he's apologizing to LGBTQ Mormons, getting ahead of his leaders, he might not get called as an apostle. And I'm like, if the church doesn't call Marlon Jensen as an apostle because he apologized to LGBTQ people getting ahead of his, colleagues or his superiors, they don't deserve Marlon Jensen. And that's probably a reckless thing to think or feel. But what I really felt was, all you have to do is look at the 1880s. All you have to do is look at the 1960s and 70s to know what causes change in the church. It's not hiding. It's not staying quiet. It's not behaving. It's public pressure.
Yep.
It's embarrassment. It's bad PR. It's members speaking out. It's public protests that get unwieldy. That's what changes the church. And I said, silence is the killer. Silence is the enabler. And all of this garbage about, well, a general authority, an apostle told me this or that, but I got to keep it quiet. That's the way that they maintain control. They keep the liberals and the progressives happy by these private secret meetings and these private secret firesides. That pacifies the liberals and the progressives. Well, Uchtdorf's my guy. Holland's my guy. Christofferson's my guy. There's going to be change, right?
Yeah.
But how long did we wait for Packer to die thinking Holland's our guy? You know what I mean? Hinckley's our guy. No change came.
Right.
That's like that, it's like a bait and switch. So no, none of them are going to save us. Silence is the enabler and the killer. The only thing that causes change is public embarrassment, public pressure, embarrassing media coverage, and members leaving in droves.
Right.
That's the only thing. That's the only thing that's ever caused change, and it's the only thing that ever will cause change. Sorry, soapbox.
No, I 100% agree. And I tried to have it both ways when I published my book 2 years ago, because I told the story of Elder McCune, but I didn't name him. Right. So I was trying to do both, trying to please both camps. But I now see, and especially after the musket fire talk by Elder Holland, I now see that there's if they're throwing more musket fire at this, then we need to do the same, honestly. And lives are at stake, and I want to do whatever I can to help save LGBTQ lives, and that means that we need to accelerate some of the pressure that the church is feeling. So.
You also feel like Elder Haynie didn't keep on his word of.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know if two wrongs make a right? But he did not keep his word to me of continuing to have dialogue with me. In our meeting, he said he was available. He was available anytime. I had his cell phone number. So I texted him a few times after the meeting too, including a month later when the BYU honor code fiasco happened. Mm-hmm. I texted him. I said, "What's going on?" And he texted back, and then he called me, and I told him, I said, "This is a disaster. Like for BYU to say that they take the section of the honor code that prohibits same-sex dating." Homosexual behavior or whatever out of the honor code, and just to not say that you just leave it out and not have any, that meant that gay students could start dating on campus. And there were all these pictures that were sent around the internet of gay students kissing. And then, the church came out like, I don't know, a week later or something like that, 2 weeks later with 2 weeks later from the CES coordinator issued
70.
a statement saying, what was that?
He's a 70, I think.
It says he's 70, yeah. He issued a statement saying that, it doesn't change, that the removal of that language from the honor code didn't change the prohibition on same-sex behavior on campus because it was inconsistent with the same-sex dating is inconsistent with the gospel because it cannot lead to a temple sealing, right? That's what he said.
Yep.
And that makes me wonder, well, what about a widow on campus who was sealed, but her husband's dead? Can she not date because she can't get sealed again, right?
Or just how many dates actually lead to temple marriage,
right?
Or temple sealing? Like,
yeah, it's a weird rationale. But anyway, I asked Elder Haynie. I said, "What was going on? Why the mixed messaging? What happened?" And he said he didn't know. And he'd get back to me. And a couple of days later, he called me back. He said, "I talked to some people, and it was just a miscommunication. BYU misunderstood that same-sex dating would be allowed. The BYU administration misunderstood." And I said, "I don't believe that." I said, "These are like academic professionals with careers on the line. They're not going to allow for," and it was multiple BYU administration people were saying that, yeah, because I actually called BYU when this was going on.
Right.
I said, "My son's there. And I'm calling as a parent, making sure and concerned, and I want to make sure that I express support for same-sex dating to be allowed." And they said, "No, it is." Yeah. When I called called BYU, the person I spoke with on the phone said, "Yes, it is. It's official." I said, "Okay, great, thanks." So I said, "Elder Haynie, I don't believe. I think there was an apostle who communicated that it was okay."
Yeah.
Because these BYU administration people would not do it otherwise. They wouldn't risk their careers on that. And I think that apostle, someone above him, probably, maybe it was Nelson or Oaks or whatever, got wind of that and corrected it. And that apostle got in trouble. I have no basis for this speculation whatsoever, but I wonder if it was Elder Holland, because he was kind of like the champion that we'd all had in the progressive circles, that change would come from Elder Holland. And then he gave his musket fire talk in August of 2021. I wonder if that talk was given by assignment, and that's why he quoted Oaks. The musket fire thing actually comes from an Oaks talk before. Mm-hmm. I wonder if that was something he was made to do because he was the one who had previously done the honor code thing. I don't know.
Like the eat your broccoli talk.
Yeah, eat your broccoli. Yeah, go fix what you messed up a year ago, sort of thing. So I have no basis for that, but I did tell Elder Haynie on the phone. I just don't. That seems odd to me that would happen. And he said, "Well, I don't know. We'll see." So yeah, I mean, going back to the actual meeting with Elder Haynie, we went through my book. Like, we went through it pretty good detail. He said the comparison I was making to the change on the racial priesthood ban, to how that could change and how it was doctrine and doctrine changed. It's different than how gay marriage could change because, Brigham Young had always said that blacks would eventually get the priesthood. And I said, yeah, but he didn't, I don't think that was clear. That he didn't know that was, he said in those quotes that it was not going to happen until the second coming, right? And he said, yeah, but it was still happening at some point. And so in my book, I just clarified. Again, I made a bunch of changes based on this conversation. I did change my book based on our conversation. But I made the statement that just like he was wrong about the timing on they can be wrong about gay marriage too. They're wrong about one thing, they can be wrong about others. So I think it's still a pretty good comparison. I'm just making sure I'm reading my notes here. One thing that actually struck me that I got a little bit angry at, which I was surprised at, and Cheryl kind of put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't be so angry about this." He said he was close with someone who was gay, and that he believed that we should love love everyone who we know who in our lives that's gay, no matter what. And I said, I don't like that phrase, "no matter what." I know a lot of people use it, right? No matter what. And I said, it seems to imply that we're loving our gay loved ones, even though they're gay. Like, no matter what seems to imply that. Like, am I going to love my left-handed kid even though he's left-handed? And I didn't like that.
Honestly, to me at this point, the whole phrase, we love our LGBTQ community, or like brothers and sisters, is just such a, it just feels wrong. It feels like I'm like being targeted by something at this point, because
It's like gaslighting.
well, it's literally, it's like that saying, like, there's no hate quite like Christian love, right? It's like this idea that, like, you say, you know, we love these people the way Christ loves them, and it is just gaslighting. Like, it's just, yeah.
Yeah.
There's love the sinner, hate the sin, you know, all that.
Yeah. But that, I mean, yeah. It's just wrong.
Just really quick, just to going back at what your theory about Holland. I remember looking this up last year, but Holland and Christofferson are the only two apostles who are board members of BYU, of the church education system.
Yeah.
All the other ones are First Presidency members. So
Yep.
yeah, it would have to come up from one
Right.
of them,
I would assume so.
either Christofferson or Holland.
Right. Yeah. Elder Haynie told me in our discussion that the church was loving on its LGBTQ policy because same-sex marriage, or sorry, that same-sex attraction isn't something that would be eternal. That, you know, it's not. He didn't say it that way. He said it's not something that that they're going to have to deal with forever. Right? They have just as much chance to be exalted as any other member of the church. And I said, yeah, but only if they live a life of misery here. And what you just described is exactly the teaching that causes many of them to want to die by suicide, because they feel like the earlier they can end their suffering here, then it's not going to be suffering on the other side. So they'll get there, like we'd already talked about.
Yeah, even 15 years ago, I was like, oh, gay Mormons, you should be happy that you'll be fixed in the afterlife. And my gay Mormon friends were like, John, that doesn't make us feel better. Like, really?
Well,
like, this is a reresurrection.
well,
if I don't have an arm, then when I'm resurrected, I get my arm. And they're like, John, just stop.
I don't know. That whole thing has been beyond the whole homophobia of that, of like me being torn apart from my life partner that I've built a life with, right? Beyond that, it's also just very ableist. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of people who are disabled, and I don't know. I did a lot of research into this when I was getting diagnosed with ADHD, like all of this disability stuff. It's really presumptuous to assume that everyone who's disabled wants their disability removed from them if they don't identify with it in some way.
Yep.
And so, I don't know. When you start examining this Mormonism actually critically for me, it's just there's so many different angles that I've since seen where it just falls apart. And I don't know. It really does take getting out of. I know, like everyone says this, but it takes getting out of the bubble in order to see, like, oh, this is what was like actually going on.
Right. And I actually did talk about the resurrection in that same context with Elder Haynie. I said the resurrection needs to be something that is hopeful for people, not something that's dreadful. Right. So if someone's going to be resurrected and they're going to lose a part of their identity, who they are, or they're going to lose, you know, something that they cherish in this life, a companion, a love, whatever it is, that is a theology that produces bad fruit here. And by their fruits ye shall know them, is what Christ taught, right? So, you know, we talked a lot about that sort of thing. I talked about the studies that shows that church teachings cause PTSD. And I talked about how the church has evolved a lot on sexual orientation teaching, so why not? I said there's a train to doctrinal Changetown that left as soon as the church admitted that being gay was not a choice. I said that just the compassion that needs to be followed eventually, the science, all that stuff, it's going to lead to change, and it's just a matter of when. And he disagreed with me and said the law of chastity would never change. Same thing. I said, yeah, but healthy outcomes, like if the law of chastity doesn't change, you're going to perpetually have this commandment that's going to lead to unhealthy outcomes for the vast majority of people who are following it. That cannot be from Christ. That cannot be Christ's doctrine. And I'd use what I talked about, the abortion line of argument again with him. I talked about that. And I talked about the other ways that the church could change without even a revelation. I said, why don't you just have somebody stand up in general conference? I talk about this in my book too. I said, just have somebody say they don't know, right? That's a simple way. Just say, hey, we don't know what's going to happen with gay couples after this life. That would be a huge change because that would just allow for people to embrace the ambiguity and to, live their lives without trauma. If they need to leave the church, you can still not have gay marriage in the church. You can just allow gay members to leave it more easily. That would be okay. Not okay. That's not ideal whatsoever in my mind, but I still think it's an idea. And I talked about, how 1 Nephi 3:7 says the Lord doesn't give any commandment except he provide a way for them for us to follow it. Right. I said, well, if we can see that the statistics and studies show that there is no way for gay members of the church, for the vast majority, 80% of them, to follow the commandment, God hasn't provided a way for them to follow the commandment without trauma, then that commandment just doesn't apply to them. You can still consider gay marriage a sin, just don't call it it's a commandment that's inapplicable, right? For any gay member who feels like they can't follow it. You can say the preference would be for them to follow it, but if they've counseled with their bishop and really studied it out, then that's an exception, that's a commandment that doesn't apply to them and they're okay. So there's things you can do. You don't need a revelation here. You just need to implement some, policy changes, this or that. There's a way you can finesse this. And I said, plus you're violating scripture. We had a good discussion.
What this doesn't respect is the fact that the brethren don't like to take counsel from people under them. There's this idea of don't get ahead of the brethren. That's how you succeed in the church, is by not getting ahead of the brethren, not telling them what they should do, not giving them that type of advice. It's a very altruistic and hopeful and optimistic approach. It's sweet and it's sincere, but it's actually the opposite of how you probably get what you want.
Yeah. No, it's very true. Very true. I talked about Elder President Oaks's 2 Commandments talk. And I said that was actually what inspired me to write something. It was a post that turned into a book. And I talked about how that just went against scripture. And I said in that talk, by the way, President Oaks misused a study. Because in the quote that you read, Gerardo, that talks about how LGBTQ youth, sometimes he was discouraging them from identifying as LGBTQ because their preference or their ideas will change over time. It was almost like saying, don't let them identify as LGBTQ. One of the parents in my parents group after that talk was done, reached out to the author of that study, that the footnotes from that conference talk, footnotes to a study, reached out to the author, and she responded saying, that's a bad misuse of my study. And the idea in the study is sometimes youth, when they're first coming to terms with being LGBTQ, they don't know. Sometimes they wonder if it's bi, they wonder if it's gay, but there's eventually an identity within the LGBTQ spectrum somewhere where they land, but they haven't figured it out because it takes a little bit of time.
I told my brother, I don't know if I'm bisexual or gay or what, and I even told my stake president I was bisexual, and so it's a lot of it really does depend on how comfortable you feel.
Yeah.
If you are gay, I know a lot of people who identify as bi first because it's more palatable, right? It's I can at least maybe tell my parents maybe I'll marry a woman, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I asked Elder Haynie, can you talk to President Oaks about that? Can you say, hey, you misused this? And he said, sure, I'll talk to President Oaks. When he called me about the honor code, I said, by the way, have you had a chance to talk to President Oaks about that? And he said, oh, I haven't heard back. He said, yeah, I made him aware that the quote was misused, or misuse of the study, but I haven't heard back from him. I was like, okay.
Oaks didn't call you and apologize?
No.
Weird.
Yeah, very weird. One thing that was very interesting is I talked about how the handbook changes recently allow for bishops to not pursue disciplinary action against gay couples, right? If it's not a mandatory thing anymore. Gay marriage is not a mandatory disciplinary counsel, it's discretionary. So I said, why?
After the November 2015 reversal.
After the November 20,
right?
In 2019, they changed.
During the November 2015 policy was that it was automatic apostasy.
Correct.
With a mandatory disciplinary counsel for legal same-sex marriage.
Right. Right, exactly. And now
which
it's
made same-sex marriage worse than rape or incest or murder, I would say, because it was disciplinary councils were optional
for those things.
But not for same-sex marriage. Yeah.
Exactly.
So that got reversed.
Because now they were treating same-sex immorality the same as heterosexual immorality, except not really, because if it's heterosexual marriage, you can have sex, but if it's same-sex marriage, you can't. But regardless, anyway, I talked with Elder Haynie and I said, why doesn't the church do a training for all of its bishops that emphasizes that it's discretionary? There's got to be a ton of bishops in the church that think it's still mandatory. And when they look it up, they're like, oh, yeah, I should do this. There's got to be homophobic bishops out there who just will go after same-sex couples. I said, why don't you do some training that says that, this is discretionary? And he said, well, is it a bad thing that some areas of the church, that this discretion allows some bishops not to and other bishops can use it? He goes, that's the discretion we want to let bishops use locally. And I said, so you want to have a situation where a bishop in a very conservative place might do a disciplinary council against a gay couple, and a bishop in a liberal place won't, but there's no difference in what the gay couples do. They're both just married gay couple. And he said, yeah, that's actually a good way to ensure that the church changes over time without losing members, because the conservative people in that area would be upset if their gay couples were not disciplined, right? And I was like, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, or I was just going to say, even, I don't know, I'm thinking of like a bishop roulette situation where you fine with one bishop and then boom, next one gives you a disciplinary council.
Yep.
I mean, that's calling a bug a feature. Like at Microsoft, sometimes we would joke, that's not a bug, that's a feature. Like chaos by design, like this is people's lives. Like when you excommunicate, like Dusty Johns, you excommunicate a believing, faithful gay couple that are attending church with their children, and all their family member and friends are LGBT, you're wreaking havoc in their lives. And to just go, well, yeah, you 10, you get the knife, but you 10, we're going to let you go free because you're in Cambridge and, Manhattan and, Berkeley, you guys are okay. Who said my house is a house of order? Who is it that said that? Who said my house is not a house of confusion? Who was that?
Jesus.
Oh, who?
Yeah. So then we left the meeting after that. He asked us if we wanted to take a tour of the church administration building. So he took us on tour, took us down to the cafeteria where they eat, and said that President Nelson changed the longstanding policy where prophets eat lunch by themselves to now he goes and eats lunch with the other general authorities. It's like, okay, cool. And
big changes in the church.
Yeah. And he told us the story about how President Oaks was set up on a date with his current wife. And I don't remember all the details, so I don't want to get too much into that. But it was something like I think his daughters were involved in the setup or something. They approved. He thought that was cool that his daughters approved. He did tell us, though, that general authorities who are widowers are highly encouraged to date and to remarry. And that Richard G. Scott actually refused to date and got a lot of flack for that, if I remember correctly. If I remember correctly,
yeah. By the brethren.
Yeah.
Because he wouldn't get remarried.
Yeah. Cheryl said during the course of that conversation that it was really insensitive that they wanted, West to be alone forever, but these general authorities who were like in their 80s can't be alone when their wives die.
For 10 minutes.
Yeah, they have to get remarried. Like, why is that? Like, they want, gay people to be celibate for forever, but that's really just doesn't make any sense. She also says she did not like the disparate treatment in the sealing policies between men and women. And Elder Haynie, I think he said he was on the sealing committee or something like that. And he said, oh no, there's no disparate treatment. Like we do cancellation, we do cancellations for women just like we do cancellations for men, sealing cancellations. And Cheryl said, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, when you have a young woman, when you have a woman who's married and her husband dies and she's been sealed to that man, like she can't get remarried. She can't get sealed to another man. So the remarriage potential is like, and she had a friend actually growing up, in her ward growing up, who had this happen. She was sealed and her husband got hit on the road riding his bike and he died, and she was in her 20s. and she had to look at the prospect of trying to get remarried to a man who would be willing not to be sealed in the temple to her. And so we shared that story with Elder Haynie, and he said, "Oh, I can see what you're saying. I can see what you're saying." And I was like,
How do you not?
How do you not?
This?
Yeah, like, come on. You should.
You're
Anyway,
on the committee.
There's so much that they're just.
I've never thought about it that way. That the candidates are probably less.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
For a woman who has been previously sealed, because
They won't cancel the
man
sealing.
needs to be okay with not being with her in the next
Yeah,
life.
a man
Yeah.
would rather have a woman who's not sealed so she can be an additional spouse sealed to him. He'd rather have the unsealed wife than the sealed wife.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
All
I mean, if
things
you're
being
a
equal.
man who's never been married, never been
Right.
sealed, you're looking for a wife,
for sure.
right? You want to find a wife who has not been sealed to another man, because the church will not cancel that sealing between that woman and her deceased husband,
Right.
because that cancels the deceased husband's sealing, right? So that woman has to find a man who's willing to not be sealed, basically.
Yeah.
Or get an exception where they're able to cancel the sealing to the deceased husband for some reason.
Yeah.
Which I know they do in some circumstances. He did tell me, though, Elder Haynie did say that in some circumstances they have allowed for a woman to get sealed to another man. And I actually asked him about the church's policy where they say if a deceased woman was married to more than one man during her life, the proxy work in the temple that's done for her is she is sealed to every man to whom she was married. I said, if you're going to do that and let a dead woman be sealed to all of her dead husbands, why can't you allow a living woman to be sealed to more than one husband too?
Wow.
Like, what's the sealing power should be the same. Sorry, too excited with my hands. The sealing power should be the same here on earth or across the veil, like it.
Or
is,
if Joseph
what's
could be
binding on
sealed
earth
to
is
other
binding in
men,
heaven.
If Joseph Smith can be sealed to other men like he was, look up dynastic sealings, then why not just let Gerardo get sealed to Zach if they want to be sealed and let God work it out in the afterlife?
Exactly. Yeah, I talk about that in my book in chapter 6 when I'm talking about the sealings. Like, when God said, "I give you the power to what you seal on earth will be sealed in heaven," maybe He meant whatever you seal, right? And I'll just work it out. He'll figure it out. And I just don't understand why there's that inequality, because it doesn't need to exist. There's enough existing doctrinal precedent for the church to embrace equal treatment in all of these areas that it's super frustrating that they don't do it. And I think it's really because they're worried about alienating members. They're worried about losing butts and seats from conservative members who've been taught so many things over so many years. But I think they could get there if they spent a few years positioning it and getting people ready for the change. Like we should
Marinating.
Yeah, we should be taking our vitamins, right? That's what President Nelson said, taking our vitamins for changes.
Yeah.
Why don't they give us those vitamins and help us get ready for the change and say, these are the doctrinal historical precedents that we have and blah, 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 and then slowly get us ready for that. But they don't.
When lower level general authorities talk about not getting ahead of the first presidency of the Quorum of the 12 and that they're the ones that receive the revelation, they're not receiving revelation. They're taking the temperature and the pulse of the general membership and simply making a calculation of when's the right time to make this change where minimum collateral damage will occur.
Right.
That's what we call revelation nowadays, is like undoing bad decisions at the right time to minimize the pain for the church. That's what modern day revelation is.
Yeah.
There's actually no revelation. It's just simply risk assessment.
Right. Right. Yeah, agreed. So the way I ended the interview with Elder Haynie, we were going out to the parking lot. I had worn a rainbow flag lapel pin the whole time during my meeting on my suit coat, and the stake president who was there with us, he had a British flag lapel pin, and he asked the stake president. He said, "Hey, what's that flag for? What are we wearing that for?" "Oh, my son's on a mission in Britain." "Oh, that's great." And Elder Haynie, looking at me, was trying to make a joke. Like he's a very personable, fun guy. I mean, I like him.
They all are.
Yeah. He said, "Hey, he looked at my flag and he said, where's that? What's that for?" And I looked at him and I said, "Everywhere." It's everywhere. Because I said, LGBTQ people are thankfully everywhere in the world. Thankfully, they're everywhere.
We're coming for you.
Yeah, exactly. So,
I'm scared.
But I mean, it was a good discussion. It's very frustrating too, though, just to understand how disconnected even a nice, loving, kind man like that, who said during our interview that he used to read dialogue a ton. he was like a dialogue Mormon for a long time. And then he realized that area of study wasn't what brought about the fruits of the Spirit for him. So he wanted to focus more on just the core principles of the gospel. So, I mean, frustrating that someone like that can not see the need for the change. And I got to be honest with you, I think he does see it. And I think there's a lot of general authorities who see it and who know they need to do this and who know they can do it. But the people at the top are calling the shots. And those people, President Nelson, President Oaks, they are so dug in on it that I don't think they'll ever change.
I don't know, man. Like, who makes it up to the general authority? Like, there's lots of stake presidents and stake presidency members that don't become general authorities. They filter out dudes like you who see it and think that the way change happens is by making good faith recommendations. And they elevate the people that never look at it, so they never see it. They never think it. They never look at it. They certainly never say it, so they never see it, or at least they don't know that they see it, and they're the ones that get elevated. Don't you think?
I agree with you.
Especially if you look at the people who have been called as apostles in the last few years, Elder Gong.
Corporate men.
Yeah.
Total corporate men.
Yeah. No, yes men are the ones who get promoted, I guess.
Company men.
For sure.
They used to be called company men.
For sure. But I do think I was eager. I was a yes man in a lot of ways in my callings. But that leads me to believe that there are a lot of yes men in callings who wish things were different, even though they are publicly and being yes men, if that makes sense. I don't know when we'll have a change. The charge of the apostles that they take to agree with whatever the majority of the quorum says, they have to publicly agree as if it's their opinion. That every apostle takes that charge when they get called as an apostle, according to Harold B. Lee anyway. Was it Harold B. Lee? I don't know who wrote it. No, not Harold B. Lee. Sorry. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's in the book. That's the charge that the apostles take. I don't know when we'll have a majority of the apostles who have kind of worked their way up as yes men, but now that they recognize that there's a majority who want to change, they're willing to talk about it being a change. I don't know when that'll happen, but I do know that I feel strong. External circumstances and forcing and pressure is what's going to make that eventual shift. But again, it's 30 years.
It's not going to come from like general authorities pressuring apostles.
No.
It's going to come from like news media, social media, protests, people leaving, embarrassing news articles. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I would personally love for the government to say any organization that treats people of a constitutionally protected class differently amongst their congregants, that church will lose its tax exempt status if it does that. It's not infringing on their religious freedom. They can still believe whatever the heck they want. But if they are treating people differently, like the government is not allowed to do, then they can still religiously have whatever beliefs they want. We're not going to shut down their church, but they just won't. They'll have to start paying taxes. I would love to see that, but that's like a pipe dream. That'll never happen.
Yeah.
But that's what I'd love to see. But anyway, so coming out of that meeting, I hired an editor, active church member in Texas. She's a writer. She's a really good friend. She's great. Did a great job of helping me tone down, put a better, softer tone on my book. She had me move the Elder McCune story from chapter 2 to chapter 9 after I laid out all the arguments for how the church could change its doctrine and all the story of my family and what we'd been through. And after I'd done all of that, then like second to last chapter, it was there. So it was great working with her. I published the book in July 2020. And simultaneously went on Richard Oster's podcast, Listen, Learn, and Love. We're episode 291. Cheryl and I went on that together to talk about the book being released. Since the book came out, I was asked to be the moderator for the Affirmation Conference, the church leaders session of the Affirmation Conference. I was still attending church. I decided I was going to, be that believer who could try to continue to affect change. Meanwhile, I'm still studying a lot all the way. I was asked to be a speaker at a multi-state conference in Washington State too, and stuff like that. But at the end of 2020,
with Patrick Mason
was a speaker too. Ben Shalati was a speaker. I did that all virtually, right? I didn't fly there. It was all COVID, so it was done over Zoom. But at the end of 2020, I started. So this is several months after my book's been out there. which I think is important to emphasize because I wrote my book as a believer still. I still believed, even though nuanced and whatever. In the end of 2020, I started listening more to Mormon stories, and then I started coming across the David Bokovoy episodes. And that kind of was a shift for me. When I started understanding what he describes as the biblical scholarship of who actually wrote the Bible, when it was written. And then I started reading books by Bart Ehrman, who's a prominent biblical scholar who talks a lot about how the New Testament, how it was actually written, how Jesus, one of the books that is really amazing, I'd encourage anyone to read, is How Jesus Became God. Goes through the historical analysis of why the early Christians turned this apocalyptic preacher, Jesus, into God. It's really fascinating. I started going down that rabbit hole of biblical scholarship, and then what I had been holding on to with the thread on the Book of Mormon, it just fell apart because I said the Book of Mormon relies so much on the Bible being literal that if even the Bible is not literally true, it's not historical, then the Book of Mormon can't really have any historicity at all. Even if it was coming through Joseph's mind, the idea that it was like maybe not completely historically correct because it came through Joseph's mind and he was interpreting and translating things in his vision. The Bible having so many problems with it too, just made me realize none of it holds up. And then even after that though, I decided I would try to be a believer still in a way. I believe that the scriptures are just good allegories. They're good stories. They're powerful, that you can just see the goodness in them and still believe. And so I kept going to church. I was still going to church. I had a friend, you're laughing.
Well, I don't know, because everyone in our family at this point was kind of already not going. And he was like, it was really just like watching someone, at first it was like watching someone swim upstream, and then it was watching someone swim up Niagara Falls. And it's just like, it's not going to happen. Like, and we could all kind of see, we're like, is he okay? Like, because you'd spend like hours and hours and hours kind of going through this and like, I don't know. I think he probably took leaving hardest out of anyone in our family, to be honest.
For sure. I mean, it's ancestry. It was a huge part of me, and it still is. Like, I don't think I'll ever not be Mormon. Even though I've resigned my membership, spoiler, it's just, it's part of who I am.
Weston, I stayed 13 years after I lost my faith.
Yeah,
hold my root beer.
Yeah. I guess I was only like a year and a half, something like that. But I wasn't going every week.
My kids are still asking if I'm okay.
It was still more like just the obsession. Like,
yeah, it was very...
Where like every single dinner table conversation would somehow come back to how Joseph Smith had... had
done this or that,
yeah. And then we would all of us would just be like, oh my God, not again, please. Just.
I had Mormon stories going all the time. Like, I would listen to it, everywhere I was walking around.
My sister, I was living in Toronto already, I think, and I got calls from my sister being like, I can't listen to another episode of Mormon Stories in the car with Dad. I'm so tired of it. Like,
I relate.
But I mean, I listened to so many, you guys. All the.
It was like
the
a
John Hamer
crisis,
episodes about how the Book of Mormon could have come about. Dan Vogel episodes about how the Book of Mormon could have been written. And that honestly was the nail in the coffin for me, was when it was clearly explained to me that he could have done it very plausibly. It's not a miraculous endeavor. It happened over the course of like a year and a half, and he could have been preparing for many years, and he could have had, it was a few hours a day that he had his head in the hat dictating stuff that he'd been memorizing or remembering, or if even as RFM says, maybe he had notes in his hat because it was a white hat and you could have seen the notes or whatever, and he was using the stone as a trick to deceive people to let himself put notes in the hat. Like, there's so many plausible ways for how Joseph could have done it that I was like, that was just the nail in my coffin. I was like, the Book of Mormon and all the Bible historicity and all that stuff is just not there. Like, I can't continue to believe. But I did respect some people who believed metaphorically in the scriptures and in metaphorical Jesus. I actually read Marcus Borg wrote, I think, Finding Jesus Again for the First Time, which is a non-Mormonism book. It's just a Christianity one where he basically just says, I believe in historical Jesus, meaning Jesus was a real person, but not necessarily God. But I believe in the idea of Jesus as God, because the ideas that he taught are what help us, find better humanity and be better people and things like that. I'm really butchering his arguments in his summary, but in short fashion, that's kind of the approach. He believed, metaphorically, I guess. And I was willing to do that. I had some close friends. I'll give a shout out to him, Rob Bladen. He's in Texas. He was from high school with me. We connected, and he would kind of make fun of me for continuing to do what I was doing. Every time I used the word metaphorically, he would make fun of me. But I made a joke with him that I felt like a little bit like Neo from the Matrix, because I was jacking back into the Matrix every time I went back to church just to try to save LGBTQ people from the Matrix. But I actually was a little more sincere in my belief and my approach than that. I actually could see some good things in the scriptures, but at the end of the day, you run the analysis, and on whole, it's just not there. And the apologist arguments are not nearly as strong as the secular arguments. And then I started studying more about other ways to believe. What could I replace Mormonism with? I studied a lot about humanism, and that really resonates with me now. Just the idea that, we all evolved in a certain way where it feels right and good to treat each other according to the golden rule. Be good humans. Lean into that. Not believe anything unless there's like evidence for it. But treat each other right. I read a book called Good Without God by a guy, Epstein, something like that, which is all about how humanism is a positive way to live your life.
He's the humanist chaplain at Harvard.
Yeah, exactly. That guy. Yeah.
Greg. Is it Greg Epstein?
Greg Epstein, something like that. Yeah. Great book. I'd encourage anybody to read that. So that's where I'm at now. I decided in the fall of 2021, after kind of learning all these things, and Holland's talk had a little bit of an influence on my decision too, that it was just time to pull the trigger. So in January of 2022, we all collectively as a family resigned our memberships. So.
Mm-hmm. January 2020?
2022.
Oh,
yeah.
2.
Yeah,
Okay.
just 8 months ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's such a huge deal to go, branch president, bishop, stake presidency member, interacting with GAs, your wife, all her leadership things, return missionary, model family to your stake, to everyone resigning.
Yeah.
That's intense. Just this year?
Just this year.
And why not just go inactive or fade away? Why resign?
A few reasons. Didn't want to have our numbers be part of the church's numbers for church membership. Wanted there to, and also for me, I wanted to not feel like, because my book was out there, and I hope it always stays out there for believing members to read, I wrote an afterword to my book describing my decision to leave. It's not in the printed version, right? Because the printed version, I published the book initially just online for free and got a bunch of requests to actually create it and turn it into a book. But so it doesn't have that came out in 2021 before I learned all these other things. But in the afterword that's online at gayldscrossroads.org, I wanted to be authentic and open with readers, because I talk so much in my book about how I'm going to stay in the church and what my belief is and how it's good to affect change from within and things like that. That I had a lot of people I was interacting with on social media who were making assumptions about my beliefs being literal. And I just felt kind of disingenuous that I wasn't believing that way anymore. And I don't ever want to be accused of being dishonest or anything like that. So I felt like publicly kind of resigning and making a post and putting it on the website that I decided to do that was the most authentic thing I could do. So, and also I just kind of want to have that symbolic separation. I know a lot of people don't take the effort to do it because they don't think the church is even worth their effort to take time to resign. But I wanted to make sure we had that. And I actually asked Wes. I remember we were actually in the bank getting our letters notarized. And he's like, Dad, this is like more of a pain in the butt than it's worth. Like, let's just not resign. Like, it's dumb. And I said, do you want the missionaries knocking on your door in 10 years because you still have a membership record? And he's like, oh, no, I don't. Okay, fine. Let's do it. Let's resign. So,
Yeah.
So, Weston, you talked about like worrying about your dad. Is he okay? Well, did you ever think you'd see the day where your parents and all your family would resign? And what was that like for you?
I mean, it was always for me never the main thing I wanted. I kept telling them, I'm like, you guys don't make any of your faith decisions based off of me. That was kind of the line I took because I was like, I've figured this out for myself, but they haven't. And the way I was viewing it at the time was like, oh, I've had this personal experience with, where I know what's right for me and what, like, if it's God or whatever. Like, I know what direction I want my life to take, but I'm not going to try and impose that on anyone else. And so I kind of let them just figure it out on their own. And I was going to, just take it as it came. And I know the whole, like, happier outside of Mormonism thing is kind of a cliche, but honestly, like, I have not seen my mom smile as much.
Oh, she's so happy.
She's so much better. And it really... Yeah. It does make me mourn a lot for like the time that we could have had when I was in high school. The people that we both could have been if things were a little bit different. So I don't know. There's a lot of mourning, I think, in our family still happening for things that we've lost, like all of us.
Yeah.
But I'm really grateful that we're all at this point now, and we can all, just enjoy being a family without any of the other strings attached. Like, I didn't realize how many strings that Mormonism attaches to your family until it's like, well, we love each other because we're an eternal family and we go to church every Sunday. It's like, no, we love each other because these people are cool. Like, I don't need another reason. Like, I don't know.
Because we're good humans.
Yeah. Like,
we don't love each other because God's watching, or because we need to be together eternally, or we have to keep commandments, or because we have the same spiritual beliefs, or anything. Like, we love each other because we love each other.
Yeah.
Like Owen is, every one of us is on a different little path spiritually, I think, right now. Like, all of us have a different perspective on things a little bit. Like, Owen likes some of the, like, Taoist principles, yin and yang, and stuff like that. And it's cool. I love it. I love it.
I don't know. I'm kind of like, I just don't care anymore. You've got the whole, like, humanism thing. I think my mom...
I really like Eckhart Tolle, too. Yeah, mom's more like you, just kind of like whatever. I don't want to pay attention.
Her and I are both just like, we've dealt with so much BS, so I just don't even want to think about it anymore. Like, and I'm just going to... For me, the biggest thing is actually finally feeling like I have control over my life. And it's funny how as soon as I felt like I had agency in my life, that I actually started being happy. Because I really didn't feel like in the church, on the mission, during any of that time, like, I could have chosen different things, but I'm not realistically given the circumstances. And now it's like the whole world is open to me, and it's a really liberating feeling and a really amazing feeling to have, given where I was at before.
That is so incredibly ironic because, number one, any discussion of the Mormon plan of salvation begins with the War in Heaven teaching about agency. And yet
irony is not lost on me. Yeah.
Yeah. But then you fast forward to the modern Mormon church, and just this month and last month, general authorities are telling, I don't know if you saw this, Weston, but they're telling, because so many kids are choosing not to serve missions, they're now telling prospective Mormon missionaries that they don't have free agency, that they made that commitment when they were 8 or 12.
Or I think about, to go back to the whole temple thing, like, when I got endowed, that's a decision I made when I started singing those songs in primary, realistically. Like I want to go, like, I want to see the temple, I'm going there someday. Like, that's when I made that decision, not when I turned 18 kind of thing. And this is the first time where it's like, I feel like going out to the bar tonight, so I'm going to go out to the bar tonight. And, like, I don't have to feel any shame about this. Or it's like, I like this person, so I'm going to date them. I'm not going to worry if they're Catholic, or whether or not they're upholding gospel standards, or if, X, Y, or Z, or any of these other things. And it's just so liberating. And I think people really don't understand how liberating it is until you're on the other side. And
that's the other irony, is that your health and happiness returned once you reclaimed your free agency from the organization that teaches that free agency is essential, but then deprives it from people.
Right.
Yeah, it's very ironic.
And I mourn. Like I said earlier, Cheryl and I have always had a great relationship, but I mourn. We have such a better relationship now. We're so much closer. So much. There's so much. The dynamic of trying to make each other happy in ways that was harmful to one or the other or whatever we were trying to do for each other that we didn't. Each of us was frustrated with, doesn't exist anymore. Now we're just genuinely so much on the same page and so much happier. Like Cheryl has been smiling like at family dinners. It's just fun. It's just fun. Life is so good. And I am really, Cheryl and I talk about this all the time. We love Elder McCune because he put us on, he broke that cycle for us finally. And we're never happier than we are now.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not going to say that there's still not stuff that we all need to work through, or that Mormonism hasn't left certain scars that I wish would heal. But, I don't know. I could list off some examples about dating where where I probably put myself in situations because I was really determined not to be the good Mormon boy anymore, and got myself into some situations I probably didn't want to be in. But on the whole, it's just, I'm finally able to, the fact that I'm even able to make those mistakes at all is really just gratifying. And yeah,
totally agree.
It's literally how you learn. You're now going to do the dating and the courtship and make some of the mistakes you should have made when you were 14 or 15 or 16.
Yeah.
You're going to make them when my kids are going through that, but they're also learning.
Yep.
And they want to live because they actually can direct their life.
Yeah. It's really crazy how much that, that's the number one thing I would say is that it's just, being able to choose things is just so, it's amazing. I don't know. It still boggles my mind, just the difference that I feel just from a couple of minor things changing in my life, right? Compared, because it's not like I'm doing a crazy different routine from what I was doing when I was in the church, right? I'm still going to school. I'm still playing a lot of video games.
Still League or another game?
Yeah, still some League sometimes. And I'm still writing stuff a lot in my free time. And so my use of time has not changed that much, besides maybe, a couple more hours on Sunday and whatever. But, and I'm still very much the same person, but it's just so much better because I don't have to feel it's because it's what I'm choosing and not being chosen for me anymore. So,
yeah. And as we kind of wrap up here, John, I don't want to leave the impression to anyone that I honor anybody's journey wherever they're at. There's a Rabbi B'nai Lappi gave a TED talk about crash theory one time, where every master story in a religion or in any circumstance has a crash where you find stuff out where you go, holy cow, the way I understood this isn't what it is, isn't really what I thought. And you have three options. Option one, you can just ignore the crash and continue on, right? Just put everything on a shelf, not deal with it. Option two is to reject everything and just turn away from your tradition and turn away from what you believed and believe completely differently. And option three is to take the good stuff and stay with that and then form your own way of believing. And I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and I said, I feel kind of bad that I chose option two. And he said, no, you didn't choose option two. Do you take all the good things you learned in Mormonism with you? I said, yeah, I am. He said, well, you're choosing option three. You're taking all the good that was there and you're continuing with that. And I learned a lot about loving people in the Mormon church. Now, obviously, my approach to the love was constrained by some of the church dogma and the church policies and things that I was subjected to and had to follow. And I feel more free now to love. I feel like I can be a better person more freely now, more easily, without as much rationalization. But I don't want to diminish or forget the good things I did learn in the church. I learned a lot about community, right? I mean, being able to draw on people. When we moved to Massachusetts, we had no family. And we went to church one Sunday, met some people, went over to their house for dinner. They're our best friends to this day. They stood by us. They're amazing people. I love the church for the people that it brought into my life. Cheryl, my kids. There's so much good that has come from the church that I can't be. I'm angry at a church. I'm angry at it, yes, but I'm also grateful in a way, and I'll always feel grateful for a lot of things. So, and I respect wherever anyone's at. But I would say, if you don't like the church's position on LGBTQ issues or on women's issues or whatever it is, speak out somehow, right? If you're an active member and you don't want to be complicit, silence is complicity. Find a way to do something about it. If you're going to stay, fine. But find a way to go as far as you can with the bishop or stake president that you have, right? Whatever that may be.
I would really encourage everyone, like, if you're able to leave, like, try and leave. And I understand that for some people it's not going to be safe. It's safe socially or for whatever reason. But if you can, like, try, because it's one of the only ways you can really get your point across, that this.
Yeah.
And I don't know, just because giving the church more resources at this point is going to be more resources into fighting things like marriage equality,
trans rights,
and these are things that we see are being attacked, with renewed vigor, and so I don't know. It's just really, really consider what your values are. I think is what I would ask of people.
Yeah, I mean, the new thing is to pay your tithing to other charities and consider yourself a full tithe payer too, right? That's a lot of progressive Mormons are doing that now. So if you want to do that, don't devote your time or your money to the church, and you want to stay to be a voice inside and you publicly talk about things, like, okay.
Yeah, but find some way.
Find a way, right?
Yeah, to make them.
But if you can leave too. Like, that's obviously what's brought us the most happiness, is leaving. So I think that's the first endorsement, but I don't want to dictate anybody's path, and I want to honor wherever anyone is. So.
Yeah.
Wow. Did we do it? Did we make it through?
I think we did. It was a lot.
That was powerful.
Yeah, super powerful, super beautiful. Gerardo, any final words or thoughts you want to share? I know this is an issue that touches you and that you feel passionately about.
Yeah. I don't know. I think they did a good job. All I can think of is the truth will set you free, right?
Yeah.
And then some say, but first it will piss you off, right? Isn't that?
Yeah.
It's true.
All right. Well, thanks, Gerardo, for making this happen today, for helping with the show notes and time codes and all that you do for us, scheduling it and producing and co-hosting. So you're awesome, Gerardo.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You make Mormon stories way better than it would have been otherwise.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess a final plug. Evan Smith's book, Gay Latter-day Saint Crossroads, My Journey, Your Journey, and a Scripture-Based Path Forward, that I'm sure Downley Jokes has on his desk.
I hope so.
With lots of dog-eared corners and yellow stickies.
Sure.
It's like, make change in 30 years.
Here's the path.
Don't give credit to Evan. But
there are so many books out there now.
Yeah.
Like Blair Ostler has a book, Queer Mormon Theology.
Carolyn Pearson wrote Circling the Wagons.
Yeah. She endorsed my book, actually. My editor got her to endorse my book. There's several endorsements at the beginning of the book from other Latter-day Saint authors. There's a path that the brethren can follow. It's so clear. But
not without destroying the church, but that's another thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned butts and seats and also tithing. None of these changes are going to lead to an increase in tithing or an increase in butts and seats. Not one. It's you talk about all the good things we get from Mormonism.
Yeah. What
I learned from Mormonism was do what is right, let the consequence follow. Dare to do right, dare to be true. You have a work that no other can do. Like, do the right thing forget the consequence. But
Yeah.
I don't know that when you're in the seats, when you're in the red chairs, making decisions that actually weaken the church, make the church get less tithing, less member loyalty, I just don't think they're able to pull those triggers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And not yet. At some point, there will come a time when if they don't change, there'll be fewer butts in seats.
Well, that's what's happening.
That's what's happening now, and it'll continue to accelerate, and they'll make the change when it's becoming impossible not to. But in the meantime, lives are hurt. So just get out if you can in the meantime.
Yeah. Yeah, they're just trying to minimize the damage and slow the leakage. The other book is This Body of Water, a memoir by Weston Smith. Again, these will be in the show notes. And according to Evan, buy Weston's book before you buy Evan's book.
Yeah, go to my website and check out my book for free. It's there to browse. West designed the website. It's amazing.
Yes, and I would say his is more of like an encyclopedia kind of thing. It's a lot to read.
It's a lot. Mine's like a resource.
It's honestly like the topical guide at the back of the
There's a 70-page topical index at the back with a bunch of websites cited and everything, and that's all available online. You can click to all the websites. I used only church-friendly websites when I was writing the book.
And it's available as a PDF.
It's available as a PDF, or you can browse it on the internet.
Don't even cite my research.
I indirectly do, John. I indirectly cite your research because it's so good, but I didn't want to use.
Salty.
I didn't want to use your name.
I'm salty. Also, you mentioned Kyle Ashworth's On the Record.
I do. That's something that's in the book. It's also on my favorite resources page on the website. I think that is probably the most important document that anybody wanting to understand the history of the church's position on LGBTQ issues, they need to read that because it's just quotes from general authorities and everything that's been said over almost 200 years now. So it's really important to read that.
So shout out to our dear friend Kyle Ashworth
For sure.
of Latter Gay Stories, or as I like to refer to him, Kyle Hancock. That's an inside joke.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Evan. Thank you, Weston. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Smith family. You guys have been amazing, and I know that this story is going to help save lives. It's going to help tens of thousands of people, if not more. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I hope so.
All right. Thanks again, Gerardo, and thanks to all of you who donate to Mormon Stories and the Open Stories Foundation. Your donations make all this possible, so if you donate, thank you. If you don't donate, we lose donors every month, 5, 10, 20 donors a month, depending on the month. Some people get bored, some people move on, some people get in financial difficulties. So if you want to replace the current donation rate to be able to keep people like Gerardo and Jen and others who are supporting us, we need your support. So please become a monthly donor at mormonstories.org. Click on the donate button, become a monthly donor. We're tax deductible in the U.S. 100% of your donations go towards the mission of the Open Stories Foundation, which is not to destroy the church, which is not to take the church down. It is to provide informed consent to Mormons and non-Mormons worldwide so they know what they're either a part of or might be considering joining. It's to support Mormons in faith crisis and to support those who feel like they need to leave the church, help them find health, healing, growth, and community after they leave. So please support us if you can. Your donations will make a difference. And most importantly, you can share this everywhere. You can comment. You can subscribe on all the social medias. We're on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. And you sharing our content with friends and family means the world, helps with the algorithms, and we really appreciate it. You can always email us at mormonstories@gmail.com. We love your feedback, and you can always comment. We try and read every comment as well. Thanks to Jen and all those at the Open Stories Foundation who make this possible, including Clint, Martin, and Carrie Woodbeck, who's on our board. And I'm super exhausted, and Margie's like texting me, where are you? Where are you? So it's time to go. Thanks to everyone who supports us. Most importantly, be kind to each other, love each other, do good, do a good turn daily. And we'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories. Take care, everybody.